Chapter 1. I am a cat. I don't have a name yet. I have no idea where I was born. All I remember is that I was mewing in some dark and damp place. That's where I first saw a human being. What's more, I later learned that it was a student, the most ferocious of all human species. It's said that these students sometimes catch us and boil us to eat. But at the time, I didn't have any such thoughts, so I wasn't particularly scared. I only felt a sort of floating sensation when he scooped me up in his palm. My first glimpse of what they call a human being was probably when I settled down a bit in his hand and looked at his face. The strange feeling I had then still lingers. First of all, his face, which should have been adorned with fur, was smooth and shiny, like a kettle. I've met quite a few cats since then, but I've never come across such a freak. What's more, the middle of his face stuck out so much. And he'd occasionally puff smoke from a hole in it. It was rather suffocating, and I felt quite ill. I only recently learned that this is what humans call smoking tobacco. For a while, I sat comfortably in the student's palm, but after a while, he started moving at a tremendous speed. I couldn't tell if he was moving or if it was just me, but my eyes spun wildly. I felt sick. I was sure I was done for when suddenly there was a thud, and I saw stars. I remember that much, but after that, no matter how hard I try to recall, everything is a blank. When I finally came to, the student was gone. All my siblings were nowhere to be seen. Even my dear mother had disappeared. Moreover, unlike the place I had been before, it was blindingly bright. I could hardly keep my eyes open. Wondering what was going on, I crawled forward and felt a sharp pain. I had been tossed from a pile of straw into a bamboo thicket. After struggling my way out of the thicket, I saw a large pond. I sat in front of the pond and tried to figure out what to do. Nothing in particular came to mind. After a while, I thought that if I cried, the student might come back for me. I tried mewing, but no one came. Eventually, a breeze swept across the pond, and dusk began to fall. I became incredibly hungry. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't make a sound. There was nothing for it. I decided to walk until I found some food, and I slowly began to circle the pond to the left. It was terribly difficult, but I persevered and crawled along until I finally reached a place that smelled vaguely of humans. Thinking I might find something to eat here, I squeezed through a hole in a broken bamboo fence and into a garden. It's a funny thing, fate. If that fence hadn't been broken, I might have starved to death by the roadside. As they say, even a single tree can offer shade. To this day, that hole in the fence is the route I used to visit the calico cat next door. Well, I had sneaked into the property, but I still didn't know what to do next. It got dark, I got hungrier, and colder, and then it started to rain. I couldn't delay any longer. So I started walking toward whatever looked bright and warm. Looking back, I realize I must have already been inside the house. Here, I encountered humans again, other than that student. The first one I met was the maid. She was even more violent than the student. The moment she saw me, she grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and tossed me outside. This won't do, I thought, so I closed my eyes and left my fate to heaven. But I couldn't stand the hunger and the cold. I snuck back into the kitchen while the maid wasn't looking. Before long, she threw me out again. I was thrown out and crawled back in and was thrown out again, repeating the same thing 4 or 5 times, as I recall. I really started to hate that maid. It was only after I stole and ate a piece of her Pacific sori that I finally felt some relief. The last time she was about to throw me out, the master of the house came out, saying, "What's all this commotion?" The maid held me up and said to the master, "This stray kitten keeps coming into the kitchen, no matter how many times I put him out." The master twirled the black hairs under his nose and looked at my face for a while. Then he said, "Well, then, keep him inside," and went back into the house. He seemed like a man of few words. The maid tossed me into the kitchen with a look of frustration. And so, I finally decided to make this house my home. My master rarely shows his face. His occupation is apparently a teacher. He comes home from school and shuts himself up in his study all day, hardly ever coming out. The people in the house think he's a very hard worker. He himself pretends to be a hard worker. But in reality, He's not as diligent as they think. I sometimes peek into his study on tiptoe, and often find him taking naps. Sometimes he drools on the book he's reading. He has a weak stomach, his skin has a pale yellow tint, and he shows signs of being sluggish and lacking in energy. Yet, he eats a lot. After eating a lot, he takes some tarkadiastase. After taking it, he opens a book. He reads 2 or 3 pages and falls asleep. He drools on the book. This is his nightly routine. Sometimes, even though I'm just a cat, I think to myself, being a teacher is a really easy job. If I were born a human, I'd definitely be a teacher. Even a cat could do a job where you sleep this much. Yet, according to my master, there's no harder job than being a teacher. Every time his friends come over, he complains about something or other. When I first moved into this house, I was extremely unpopular with everyone except the master. Wherever I went, I was shooed away and ignored. The extent of my unwelcome status is evident in the fact that, to this day, they haven't even given me a name. So, I decided to stay as close to the master, who had at least taken me in, as I could. I always sit on his lap when he reads the newspaper in the morning. I always lie on his back when he naps. It's not that I particularly like the master, but he's the only one who doesn't mind me. After various experiences, I've settled on sleeping on the rice container in the morning, on the kotatsu at night, and on the veranda when the weather is nice during the day. But what I enjoy most is snuggling up with the children in their beds at night. These children, aged 5 and 3, share a bed in one room at night. I always find a way to squeeze myself in between them, but if one of the children wakes up, especially the younger one, who has a bad temper, it's a disaster. The cat's here. The cat's here, they yell, crying at the top of their lungs, even in the middle of the night. Then, the master, with his nervous, weak stomach, always wakes up and rushes in from the next room. Just the other day, he gave me a good whack on the backside with a ruler. The more I live with humans and observe them, the more I'm convinced that they are selfish creatures. Especially the children I sometimes sleep with. When they feel like it, they turn people upside down, put bags over their heads, throw them out, or shove them into the fireplace. But if I even try to retaliate, the whole household gangs up on me and persecutes me. Just recently, I was sharpening my claws on the tatami mat, and the mistress got so angry she hasn't let me into the living room since. She doesn't seem to care that others shiver on the kitchen's wooden floor. The white cat across the street, whom I respect, always says every time we meet that there's nothing more heartless than a human. She recently gave birth to 4 adorable kittens. However, on the 3rd day, the student living there took them all to the pond in the back and abandoned them. The white cat, in tears, told me the whole story and declared that for our feline race to fully experience parental love and enjoy a beautiful family life, we must fight against humans and exterminate them. I agree with every word. And the calico cat next door is outraged that humans don't understand the concept of ownership. Among our kind, the first one to find a dried sardine head or a carp belly button has the right to eat it. If the other party doesn't respect this rule, we resort to force. Yet, humans seem to have no such notion, and any treat we find is invariably stolen by them. They rely on their superior strength and think nothing of robbing us of what is rightfully ours. The white cat lives with a military family, and the calico cat lives with a lawyer. I live with a teacher, so I'm more optimistic than they are when it comes to these things. I'm just happy to get by each day. Humans can't prosper forever. It's best to be patient and wait for the cat's time to come. Speaking of selfishness, it reminds me of how my master's selfishness led to his failure. He's not particularly good at anything, but he likes to dabble in everything. He writes haiku and submits them to the Hototojisu magazine, sends modern poetry to Myojo, writes English full of mistakes, sometimes gets obsessed with archery, learns no chanting, or even tries to play the violin, producing awful squawks. Unfortunately, none of it ever amounts to anything. Yet, despite his weak stomach, he becomes incredibly enthusiastic when he starts something new. He chants no songs in the toilet and is nicknamed Toilet Sensei in the neighborhood, but he doesn't seem to care and keeps chanting, "I am indeed Lord Munmori Taira." Everyone laughs at him, saying, "There he goes again, Munmori." One payday, about a month after I moved in, the master came home in a flurry, carrying a large package. I wondered what he had bought, and it turned out to be watercolor paints, brushes, and Whatman paper. It seemed he had decided to quit no and haiku and take up painting. Sure enough, for a while after that, he spent every day in his study, painting instead of napping. But when you looked at his finished paintings, no one could tell what they were supposed to be. Perhaps he himself felt they weren't very good because one day I overheard him talking to a friend who studied aesthetics. "I just can't seem to paint well," the master confessed. "It looks so easy when other people do it, but when I pick up a brush, it suddenly feels incredibly difficult." It was a truly honest statement. His friend looked at the master's face over his gold-rimmed glasses and said, "Well, you can't expect to be good from the start. You can't paint well just by imagining things indoors." The Italian master Andrea del Sarto once said, "If you want to paint, depict nature itself. There are stars in the sky, dewdrops on the ground, birds in flight, beasts that run, goldfish in the pond, and crows on bare branches. Nature itself is a grand, living painting. Why don't you try painting from life?" Oh, did Andrea del Sarto really say that? I had no idea. "You're absolutely right. That makes perfect sense," the master said, utterly impressed. I could see a mocking smile behind the gold rims. The next day, I was taking a pleasant nap on the veranda, as usual, when the master came out of his study and started fussing about behind me. I opened my eyes a crack to see what he was doing. He was completely absorbed, putting Andrea del Sarto's advice into practice. I had already had enough sleep and was desperate to yawn. But I thought it would be rude to move while the master was so diligently painting, so I patiently endured. He had finished sketching my outline and was now coloring my face. I'll admit it, I'm not exactly a prize-winning cat. I don't think my back, my fur, or my features are any better than any other cat's. But even I don't think I look as strange as the master was making me out to be. First of all, the color was wrong. My fur is a light gray with lacquer-like markings, like a Persian cat. I think anyone would agree with that. But the color the master was using was neither yellow nor black, neither gray nor brown, nor a mixture of these. It was a color that defied description. What's more, I had no eyes. Of course, this was understandable since he was painting me while I was asleep, but the absence of anything resembling eyes made it impossible to tell whether I was a blind cat or just a sleeping one. I thought to myself that even Andrea del Sarto wouldn't be able to do anything with this. But I had to admire his enthusiasm. I wanted to stay still for as long as possible, but I really needed to pee. The muscles in my lower body twitched. I couldn't hold it any longer, so I excused myself, stretched my front legs, lowered my head, and let out a huge yawn. Well, there was no point in staying still any longer. Since I had already ruined the master's plan, I decided to go out back and relieve myself, and I started to crawl away. "You idiot," the master yelled from inside, his voice a mixture of disappointment and anger. He always calls people idiot when he's angry. He probably doesn't know any other insults, so it can't be helped, but to be called an idiot after I had been so patient was a bit much. If he had ever shown me a little kindness, like when I sit on his back, I might have accepted the insult. But he has never done anything nice for me. To be called an idiot just for needing to pee was cruel. Humans are so arrogant, relying on their superior strength. If someone stronger than them came along and taught them a lesson, who knows how arrogant they would become. I could tolerate this level of selfishness, but I've heard far more distressing stories about human wickedness. There's a small tea garden, about 100 square feet, behind our house. It's not big, but it's a pleasant, sunny spot. When the children are too noisy for me to nap, or when I'm bored and feeling a bit off, I always go there to refresh myself. One mild, early spring afternoon around 2 o'clock, after a satisfying nap after lunch, I headed for the tea garden for some exercise. I was sniffing at the roots of the tea plants, one by one, and reached the cedar fence on the west side when I saw a large cat lying unconscious on a patch of withered chrysanthemums. He seemed completely oblivious to my approach, or perhaps just indifferent, snoring loudly as he slept sprawled out. I was amazed at his audacity. How could an intruder in someone else's garden sleep so soundly? He was a pure black cat, easily twice my size. The afternoon sun cast its transparent rays upon his fur, making the fine hairs gleam as if an invisible flame were about to ignite within the darkness. I stood before him, captivated, forgetting everything else as I admired him. A gentle early spring breeze rustled the paulownia branches above the cedar fence, and 2 or 3 leaves fluttered down onto the withered chrysanthemums. The great cat suddenly opened his round eyes. I still remember how they shone, far more beautifully than any amber prized by humans. He didn't move a muscle. His piercing gaze, emanating from the depths of his eyes, focused on my small forehead. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. I thought his language was a bit vulgar for a great cat, but his voice held a power that could intimidate even a dog, and I was a little scared. But I thought it best to greet him to avoid trouble, so I replied as calmly as possible, "I am a cat. I don't have a name yet." My heart was certainly beating faster than usual. He snorted contemptuously. "A cat, you say? That's rich. Where do you live, Squirt?" He was quite arrogant. "I live with the teacher who lives here." "Figures. You look awfully skinny." Judging by his tone, I didn't think he was a well-bred cat. But his plumpness suggested he ate well and lived comfortably. "And who are you?" I couldn't help asking. "I'm Kuro, the rickshaw cat," he declared proudly. Kuro, the rickshaw cat, was notorious in the neighborhood for his rough manners. However, being just a rickshaw cat, he was all brawn and no brains, so no one really associated with him. He was the target of a collective ostracization policy. Hearing his name, I felt a bit intimidated but also a little contemptuous. I decided to test his ignorance. "So, who's more important, a rickshaw man or a teacher?" I asked. "A rickshaw man is way stronger. Look at your master, he's all skin and bones. You certainly look strong for a rickshaw cat. I guess you eat well at the rickshaw stand." "Hell, I never go hungry, no matter where I am. You should tag along with me instead of hanging around this tea garden. You'll fatten up in no time." "I'll keep that in mind. But I think the teacher's house is bigger than the rickshaw stand." "You're nuts. What good is a big house if it doesn't fill your belly?" He twitched his shaved bamboo shoot-like ears irritably and stomped off. That's how I became acquainted with Kuro, the rickshaw cat. After that, I encountered Kuro frequently. Every time we met, he boasted about being a rickshaw cat. The wicked deed I mentioned earlier I actually heard from Kuro. One day, Kuro and I were lounging in the warm tea garden, chatting, as usual. After rehashing his usual boasts, he asked me, as if condescending, "How many rats have you caught?" Although I considered myself far more intelligent than Kuro, I knew I couldn't compare to his strength and courage. So I felt a bit awkward when he asked this question. However, a fact is a fact, and I couldn't lie, so I replied, "Actually, I haven't caught any yet, although I've thought about it." Kuro vibrated his long, bristly whiskers and laughed heartily. Kuro, despite his boasting, had a weakness. If you listened attentively to his bragging, purring appreciatively, he became quite docile. I had figured this out soon after meeting him, so I decided not to worsen the situation by defending myself. Instead, I thought it best to let him talk about his own exploits and change the subject. "So," I meekly prompted him, "you must have caught quite a few, being as old as you are." As expected, he puffed up his chest and replied triumphantly, "Not a ton, but maybe 30 or 40. He continued, "I could take on 100 or 2 rats any day, but weasels are a different story. I had a terrible experience with a weasel once." "Oh really?" I interjected, feigning interest. Kuro widened his eyes. "It was during the big cleaning last year. My master went under the veranda with a bag of lime, and this huge weasel jumped out, startled. You wouldn't believe it." I murmured, pretending to be impressed. "Weasels are just slightly bigger rats." "So, I chased the damn thing and finally cornered it in a ditch." "Well done." I cheered. But just when I thought I had it, the bastard let out a fart. It stank like you wouldn't believe. Now, whenever I see a weasel, I feel sick. He raised a paw and rubbed his nose several times as if still smelling the stench from last year. I felt a little sorry for him, so I tried to cheer him up. "But when it comes to rats, they're no match for you. You're such a master rat catcher, and you eat so many rats that you're so plump and your coat is so glossy." My attempt to flatter Kuro, however, backfired. He sighed dramatically. It's frustrating when you think about it. No matter how many rats I catch, humans are the biggest jerks. They take all the rats I catch and bring them to the police box. The police don't know who caught them, so they give 5 sen for each rat. My master has made about 1 yen and 50 sen thanks to me, but he never gives me anything decent to eat. Humans are just good-for-nothing thieves. Even the uneducated Kuro seemed to understand this logic, and he bristled his fur in anger. I felt a bit uneasy, so I quickly changed the subject and went home. From that day on, I decided never to catch a rat. But I didn't become Kuro's sidekick and hunt for other treats either. Sleeping is much more comfortable than eating treats. Living with a teacher seems to make a cat teacher-like. I have to be careful not to develop a weak stomach. Speaking of teachers, my master seems to have finally realized his hopeless at watercolor painting. He wrote the following in his diary on December 1st. Met someone named so-and-so at today's gathering. I hear he's quite the libertine, and indeed, he has the air of a man of the world. This type of person is popular with women, so it's probably more accurate to say that so-and-so was compelled to be a libertine rather than choosing to be one. I hear his wife is a geisha. How enviable. Most people who criticize libertines are those who lack the qualifications to be one themselves. And among those who pride themselves on being libertines, many also lack the qualifications. They force themselves to do it even though they aren't compelled to. It's just like my watercolor painting, I'll never master it. Yet, I still consider myself a man of the world. If drinking at restaurants and visiting tea houses qualifies one as a man of the world, then I should also qualify as a watercolor painter. Just as it's better not to paint watercolors like mine, a foolish man of the world is far inferior to an unsophisticated bumpkin. I don't quite agree with his theory on men of the world. And envying a geisha wife is a foolish thought unbecoming of a teacher. But his self-assessment of his watercolor painting is spot on. Despite this self-awareness, his vanity is hard to shake. 2 days later, on December 4th, he wrote this in his diary. Last night, I had a dream that someone framed one of my hopeless watercolor paintings and hung it in the transom. Seeing it framed, I suddenly felt I had become a skilled painter. I was overjoyed. I stood there admiring it, thinking, this is quite something, when I woke up with the dawn, and with the morning light, the realization that it was still as bad as ever became clear. It seems the master is burdened even in his dreams by his attachment to watercolor painting. With this mindset, he'll never become a watercolor painter, let alone a true man of the world, as Confucius would say. The day after the master dreamt of watercolors, the aesthetic scholar with the gold-rimmed glasses visited him after a long absence. As soon as he sat down, he asked, "How's the painting coming along?" The master replied calmly, "I've been focusing on painting from life, as you advised. I'm certainly noticing the shapes of things and the subtle changes in color in a way I never did before. I suppose Western art has developed as it has because they've emphasized painting from life since ancient times. Andrea del Sarto was a genius." He didn't mention anything about his diary entry and continued to praise Andrea del Sarto. The scholar laughed and said, scratching his head, "Actually, I made that up." What? The master still hadn't realized he'd been tricked. What, you ask? Your beloved Andrea del Sarto. I completely fabricated that story. Ha 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 ha. I never thought you'd take it so seriously. He looked extremely pleased with himself. I listened to their conversation from the veranda and wondered what the master would write in his diary that day. This scholar's sole pleasure in life seemed to be tricking people with his fabrications. He continued chattering, oblivious to the impact the Andrea del Sarto incident had had on the master's emotions. It's quite amusing to tell a joke and have someone take it seriously. It evokes a delightful sense of the comical. The other day, I told a student that Nicholas Nickleby had advised Gibbon to stop writing his magnum opus, The History of the French Revolution, in French and to publish it in English instead. This student, bless his heart, had a remarkable memory, and he actually repeated my story verbatim at a lecture at the Japanese Literature Society. There were about 100 people in the audience, and they all listened intently. And then there's another funny story. The other day, at a gathering of writers, Someone mentioned Harrison's historical novel Theophano. So I said it was a masterpiece of historical fiction, especially the scene where the heroine dies, which is chillingly powerful. Then, a well-known professor sitting across from me said, "Yes, that passage is truly beautifully written." That's when I realized that he, like me, hadn't read the novel at all. The master, with his nervous, weak stomach, asked with wide eyes, "What would you do if the other person had actually read the book?" He seemed to be thinking, it's fine to deceive people, but what happens when you're caught? The scholar didn't flinch. "Oh, I'd just say I mistook it for another book," he said with a chuckle. This scholar, despite his gold-rimmed glasses, had something in common with Kuro, the rickshaw cat. The master silently puffed smoke rings, looking as if he'd never be so bold. The scholar, taking this as a sign of defeat, said, "Jokes aside, painting is actually quite difficult. Leonardo da Vinci is said to have instructed his students to copy stains on temple walls. If you look closely at a rainy wall in a toilet, for example, you'll find some interesting natural patterns. Try painting those. I'm sure you'll come up with something interesting." "You're trying to trick me again, aren't you?" "No, I'm serious this time. It's actually a rather ingenious idea, isn't it? Something Da Vinci would say." "I suppose it is ingenious," the master conceded, half defeated. "However, he doesn't seem to be painting in the toilet yet." Kuro, the rickshaw cat, later became lame. His glossy fur gradually faded and thinned. His eyes, which I had described as more beautiful than amber, were now filled with rheum. I was particularly struck by his loss of vigor and his deteriorating physique. The last time I saw him in the tea garden, I asked how he was doing. "I've had enough of weasel farts and fishmongers carrying poles," he replied. The maple leaves, a few streaks of red against the green pines, scattered like a distant dream, and the red and white camellia blossoms that had carpeted the area around the stone basin had all fallen. With the winter days growing shorter, and the cold north wind becoming a daily occurrence, even my nap times seemed to be shrinking on the 10-foot south-facing veranda. The master goes to school every day. He comes home and shuts himself up in his study. When visitors come, he complains about being a teacher. He rarely paints anymore. He's stopped taking takadiastase, saying it doesn't work. The children diligently go to kindergarten every day. They come home singing songs, bouncing balls, and sometimes dangling me by my tail. I don't eat treats, so I'm not getting any fatter, but I'm reasonably healthy, I haven't become lame, and I'm getting by day. I never catch rats. The maid still dislikes me. They still haven't given me a name, but there's no end to wanting things, so I intend to live out my life as a nameless cat in this teacher's house. Chapter 2. Since the new year, I've become somewhat famous, which, even for a cat, makes me feel a bit proud. Early New Year's Day, a postcard arrived for the master. It was a New Year's greeting from an artist friend of his. The top half was painted red, the bottom half dark green, and in the center, a pastel drawing of an animal crouching. The master, in his study, examined the postcard from every angle, commenting on the beautiful colors. Just when I thought he was done admiring it, he'd start examining it again from another angle. He twisted his body, stretched out his hand as if he were an old man examining a no mask, then held it up to his nose, squinting at it through the window. I was worried he might drop me in his fidgeting. Finally, his movements subsided, and he muttered, "I wonder what this is supposed to be." He admired the colors but couldn't figure out what the animal was. Thinking, what a strange postcard if he can't even tell what it is, I elegantly half-opened my sleepy eyes and took a nonchalant look. It was, without a doubt, a portrait of me. It wasn't a masterpiece like something by someone who'd studied Andrea del Sarto, but being by an artist, the form and colors were well executed. Anyone could tell it was a cat. Anyone with a discerning eye could even tell it was me. It was a bit pathetic that the master was struggling so much to figure out something so obvious. I wanted to tell him it was me. Even if he couldn't tell it was me specifically, I at least wanted him to know it was a cat. But alas, humans aren't blessed with the ability to understand the language of felines, so I unfortunately left him to his confusion. I must point out that the casual, dismissive way humans often talk about us cats is quite inappropriate. Teachers, in their arrogant ignorance, tend to think that cats were created from human waste, which became cows and horses, whose dung in turn produced cats. But even a cat isn't made so simply. From a distance, we may all look alike, as if we have no individual characteristics, but within cat society, things are quite complex. Just like humans, we are all different. Our eyes, noses, fur, paws, everything is different. From the angle of our whiskers to the set of our ears and the curve of our tails, no two cats are alike. We have our beauties and our plain yanes, our likes and dislikes, our stylish and our frumpy. We are as diverse as humans, yet human eyes, always looking upward, fail to recognize our individual qualities, let alone distinguish our appearances. As the old saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. When it comes to cats, only a cat truly understands. No matter how advanced humans become, they will never grasp this. It's even more difficult since, contrary to their belief, they are not as superior as they think they are. And my master, lacking in empathy, is a man who doesn't even understand that mutual understanding is the foundation of love. He clings to his study like a stubborn oyster, never venturing out into the world. It's rather amusing how he puts on this air of enlightenment. The proof of his lack of enlightenment is right in front of him. He can't even tell that the portrait is of me, speculating that it must be a bear since this is the second year of the Russo-Japanese War. As I was pondering this, purring on the master's lap, the maid brought in a second postcard. This one was printed, showing 4 or 5 foreign cats in a row, holding pens, reading books, and studying. One of them had left its seat and was doing a Western-style cat dance in the corner of the desk. Above them, written in bold Japanese calligraphy, were the words "I am a cat." And on the right, a haiku, reading or dancing, "A cat's spring day unfolds, full of feline joys." This postcard came from a former student of the master's, and its meaning should have been obvious, yet the oblivious master still didn't get it. He tilted his head in puzzlement and muttered, "Is this the year of the cat?" He still hadn't realized how famous I had become. Then, the maid brought a third postcard. This one wasn't a picture postcard. It read "Happy New Year," and next to it, "Please give my best regards to the esteemed cat." Even the obtuse master finally understood. He said, looking at my face. His gaze seemed to hold a hint of respect. It seemed that the master, whose existence had been ignored by the world, had finally gained a new perspective, all thanks to me. Considering this, I suppose a little respect was in order. Just then, the gate rattled, "Kailin, Kailin, chiliriririn." It must be a visitor. If it's a visitor, the maid will announce them. Except for when Yume, the fishmonger, comes, I never go out to greet guests. So, I calmly stayed on the master's lap. The master looked towards the entrance with an anxious expression, as if a loan shark had just arrived. He hated entertaining New Year's guests. If only all humans were this reclusive. He could have just gone out, but he lacked the courage. He truly was an oyster at heart. After a while, the maid came in and announced, "Mr. Kangetsu is here." This Kangetsu was apparently another former student of the master's, and rumor had it he was now more successful than the master. For some reason, this man often visited the master. He would come, ramble about women, whether he had one, whether he wanted one, whether the world was interesting or boring, exciting or dull, and then leave. I couldn't understand why he would bother visiting a withered old man like the master with such talk, let alone why the oyster-like master would listen and occasionally chime in. It's been a while. I've been quite busy since the end of last year, and even though I've been meaning to visit, my feet just haven't taken me in this direction, Kangetsu said, fiddling with his hari cord, speaking in riddles. And in which direction have your feet been taking you? The master asked seriously, tugging at the cuff of his black cotton-crested hari. The hari, being cotton and too short, revealed about an inch of his long underwear on either side. Here he, in a slightly different direction, Kangetsu chuckled, revealing a missing front tooth. "What happened to your tooth?" the master asked, changing the subject. "Well, I was eating some shiitake mushrooms, and..." "You were eating what?" "Shiitake mushrooms. I was trying to bite off the cap with my front teeth when one of them just snapped off." Losing a tooth eating shiitake mushrooms sounds rather old manish. "It might make a good haiku, but it won't win you any ladies," the master said, lightly tapping my head. "Ah, Is this the famous cat? He's gotten quite plump, hasn't he? He could rival Kuro, the rickshaw cat. What a magnificent creature, Kangetsu said, praising me lavishly. He's grown quite a bit recently, the master said proudly, patting my head. I was pleased with the compliment, but my head hurt a little. Just the other night, I played in a concert, Kangetsu said, returning to his original topic. Where? Where, you ask? Surely, you don't need to know the details. There were 3 violins and a piano accompaniment. It was quite enjoyable. With 3 violins, even amateurs sound good. 2 of them were women, and I joined them. I thought I played rather well myself. And who were these women? The master asked, a hint of envy in his voice. Despite his usual austere demeanor, the master wasn't indifferent to women. He had once read a Western novel in which a character fell in love with almost every woman he met, estimating that he was enamored with nearly 70% of the women he passed on the street. The master had found this observation to be quite true. It was puzzling why such a flirtatious man led such an oyster-like existence. Some said it was due to a broken heart, others blamed his weak stomach, and still others attributed it to his lack of money and timid nature. In any case, he wasn't a figure of historical significance, so it didn't really matter. What mattered was that he had asked about Kangetsu's female companions with a tinge of envy. Kangetsu grinned, picking up a slice of kamaboko with his chopsticks and biting it in half with his remaining front teeth. I was worried he might lose another one, but this time he was fine. Oh, they were just 2 young ladies I know. You wouldn't know them, he replied evasively. Oh, really, the master pressed, but his really lacked conviction. Kangetsu, sensing it was time to change the subject, said, "What lovely weather we're having. If you're free, why don't we go for a stroll? The city is in a celebratory mood since the fall of Port Arthur." The master, however, was more interested in the identities of Kangetsu's female companions than the fall of Port Arthur. He pondered for a moment, then finally stood up resolutely. "All right, let's go," he said. He was still wearing his black cotton-crested hari and a padded cotton kimono made of yuki silk, a keepsake from his older brother, which he had been wearing for 20 years. No matter how durable yuki silk is, it couldn't withstand such constant wear. It was thinning in places, and if you held it up to the light, you could see the stitches from the patches sewn on the back. The master's attire never changed, whether it was December or January, everyday wear or formal. He always went out with his hands tucked in his sleeves. Perhaps he had no other clothes, or perhaps he simply couldn't be bothered to change. I couldn't tell. However, I didn't think it was due to a broken heart. After the 2 men left, I helped myself to the leftover kamaboko that Kangetsu had bitten into. I was no ordinary cat these days. I considered myself worthy of being mentioned alongside the cat from Momokawa Joan or the cat who stole the grey goldfish. Kuro, the rickshaw cat, was beneath my notice. I didn't think anyone would mind if I ate a slice of kamaboko. Besides, this habit of sneaking snacks wasn't unique to felines. Osan, the maid, often pilfered sweets and rice cakes while the mistress was out. And even the children, whom the mistress boasted were so well behaved, had this tendency. A few days ago, the 2 children woke up unusually early and sat at the dining table while their parents were still asleep. They usually had some of the master's bread with sugar every morning. That day, the sugar bowl happened to be on the table with a spoon next to it. Since there was no one to serve them, the older child took a spoonful of sugar from the bowl and put it on her plate. The younger child followed suit, putting the same amount of sugar on her own plate. They stared at each other for a while, then the older child took another spoonful and added it to her plate. The younger one immediately did the same. The older one took another spoonful, and the younger one followed. This continued until both plates were piled high with sugar, and the bowl was empty. Just then, the master emerged from the bedroom, rubbing his sleepy eyes, and poured all the sugar back into the bowl. From this, I concluded that while humans might surpass cats in their sense of fairness, derived from their selfishness, they are actually less intelligent. I thought they should have just eaten the sugar before making such a mess, but as usual, my feline wisdom was lost on them. I could only watch from atop the rice container. The master returned late that night after his outing with Kangetsu. He didn't appear at the breakfast table until around 9 the next morning. Observing him from my perch on the rice container, I saw him silently eating his ozoni, bowl after bowl. The pieces of mochi were small, but he ate 6 or 7 of them, leaving the last piece in the bowl. If anyone else were so picky, it would be unacceptable, but the master, in his self-satisfied way, didn't seem to mind the soggy, disintegrating mochi remnant in the cloudy broth. When the mistress brought out some takadiastase from the cupboard and placed it on the table, the master said, "It doesn't work, so I'm not taking it. But it's supposed to be very effective for digesting starches, dear. You should take it," she insisted. "I don't care if it's starch or whatever. It doesn't work. But you said it worked wonders just the other day, and you took it every single day." "It worked then. It doesn't work now," he retorted. "If you keep starting and stopping like that, even the most effective medicine won't work. You need to be more patient if you want to cure your weak stomach. It's not like other illnesses, you know," she said, glancing at Osan, the maid, who was standing by. "She's absolutely right, sir. You need to take it for a while to see if it works or not," Osan chimed in, siding with the mistress without hesitation. "I don't care what you say. I'm not taking it. What do women know anyway? Just be quiet." "Well, I tried," the mistress sighed, placing the takadiastase in front of the master as if challenging him to a duel. The master stood up without a word and went into his study. The mistress and Osan exchanged knowing smiles. I knew better than to follow him into his study at a time like this. I'd surely be punished. So, I quietly went around the house and climbed onto the veranda outside his study. Peeking through a gap in the sliding door, I saw him open a book by someone named Epictetus. If he actually understood what he was reading, that would be impressive. After a few minutes, he slammed the book shut on the desk. I figured that would happen. Then, he took out his diary and wrote. "Went for a walk with Kangetsu around Nezu, Uyeno, Ikinahata, and Kanda. Saw a geisha in a spring kimono with elaborate hem patterns, playing battledore and shuttlecock near Ikinahata. Her outfit was beautiful, but her face was quite ugly. She looked a bit like our cat." He didn't have to use me as an example of ugliness. If I went to Kitadoko and got a shave, I wouldn't look that different from a human. Humans are so conceited. Turned the corner by Houghton, and saw another geisha. This one was tall and slender, with sloping shoulders, a truly striking figure. Her light purple kimono suited her perfectly. She flashed a white smile and called out, "Gen-chan, last night. I was just so busy." However, her voice was as raspy as a crow's, which greatly diminished her allure. I couldn't be bothered to look back to see who this Gen-chan was and continued on my way with my hands in my sleeves. Human psychology is truly baffling. Was the master angry, flattered, or seeking solace in the writings of a philosopher? I couldn't tell. Was he mocking the world, or longing to be a part of it? Was he annoyed by trivialities, or had he transcended worldly concerns? I had no idea. Cats, on the other hand, are simple creatures. We eat when we're hungry, sleep when we're tired, get truly angry when we're upset, and cry our hearts out when we're desperate. And we certainly don't keep diaries. There's no need. Humans like my master, with their hidden sides, may need to write diaries to reveal their true selves in the privacy of their rooms. But for us felines, our every action, from waking to sleeping, eating to eliminating, is a diary in itself. We don't need to go through such trouble to preserve our true image. If you have time to write a diary, you have time to nap on the veranda. Had dinner at a restaurant in Kanda. Had a few cups of Natsume Sōseki for the first time in a while. My stomach feels great this morning. I think an evening drink is the best cure for a weak stomach. Takadiastase is useless. It doesn't work, no matter what anyone says. He's so vehemently against takadiastase. It's as if he's arguing with himself. His morning frustration is resurfacing. Perhaps this is the true nature of a human diary. The other day, so-and-so told me that skipping breakfast is good for the stomach, so I tried it for a few days, but my stomach just rumbled. It didn't work. So-and-so advised me to avoid pickled vegetables. According to him, all stomach problems stem from pickles. If you eliminate pickles, You eliminate the root cause of stomach problems, and a full recovery is guaranteed. I didn't touch pickles for a week, but it didn't make any difference, so I've started eating them again. So-and-so told me abdominal massage is the only cure. Not just any massage, but an old-style massage called the Minagawa method. He said a couple of sessions would cure most stomach ailments. Apparently, even the great scholar Yasui Sokken loved this massage, and even a hero like Sakamoto Ryoma had it done occasionally. So, I went all the way to Kamenejishi to try it. But the masseur was brutal, saying he had to massage my bones and rearrange my internal organs. Afterward, my body felt like cotton, and I felt like I was in a coma, so I gave up after one session. So-and-so told me not to eat any solids. So, I lived on milk for a day, but my intestines gurgled all night, and I felt like I had diarrhea. I couldn't sleep at all. So-and-so told me to breathe with my diaphragm to exercise my internal organs, which would naturally improve my stomach function. I tried that too, but it just made my stomach feel uneasy. Besides, even when I focused on it intently, I'd forget after 5 or 6 minutes. And if I tried to remember, I'd become so conscious of my diaphragm that I couldn't read or write. The aesthete mighty saw me like this and said sarcastically, "You look like a man in labor. Just give it up." So, I've stopped. So-and-so told me to eat soba noodles, so I diligently ate both hot and cold soba, but it just gave me diarrhea. I've tried everything I can think of to cure my chronic stomach problems, but nothing works. Only the 3 cups of Masamune I had with Kangetsu last night seem to have had a positive effect. I'll have a few cups every night from now on. I'm sure this won't last long. The master's mind is as fickle as a cat's eye. He never sticks with anything for long. It's amusing how he worries so much about his stomach problems in his diary, yet he puts on a brave face in public. The other day, a scholar friend of his visited and argued, from a certain perspective, that all illnesses are the result of one's own and one's ancestors' sins. It was a well-researched, logical, and well-organized theory. My poor master didn't have the intellect or knowledge to refute it. But since he was suffering from stomach problems, he tried to defend himself. "Your theory is interesting," he said, "but Carlyle had a weak stomach, you know." It was as if he thought his weak stomach was somehow validated by Carlyle's. His friend retorted, "Just because Carlyle had a weak stomach doesn't mean everyone with a weak stomach is Carlyle." The master fell silent. He's so vain, yet he surely knows it's better not to have a weak stomach. It's rather comical that he's now planning to start drinking every night. Come to think of it, the reason he ate so much ozoni this morning might be because of the Masamune he drank with Kangetsu last night. Now I'm craving some ozoni myself. I'm a cat, but I'm not a picky eater. I don't have the energy to venture out to the fishmongers in the back alleys like Kuro, the rickshaw cat, nor can I afford the luxury of the calico cat next door, who belongs to the shamisen teacher on Shinmichi Street. Therefore, I'm not particularly fussy. I'll eat the children's leftover bread and lick the sweet bean paste from their cakes. Pickled vegetables are quite disgusting, but I once tried a couple of slices of Tarquan radish just for the experience. It turns out I can eat almost anything. To be picky about food is a luxury that a cat living with a teacher can't afford. According to the master, there was once a novelist in France named Balzac. He was a man of great extravagance, not in his food, but in his writing. One day, Balzac was trying to come up with a name for a character in his novel, but he couldn't find one he liked. A friend came to visit, so they went for a walk. The friend, of course, had been dragged along unknowingly, but Balzac was preoccupied with finding a name, so he walked around looking at shop signs. He still couldn't find a name he liked, so he kept walking aimlessly, his friend trailing behind, bewildered. They spent the entire day exploring Paris. Finally, as they were heading home, Balzac noticed a sign on a tailor's shop. It read Marcus. Balzac clapped his hands. "That's it. That's the one. Marcus is a great name. I'll add a Z as the initial. Z Marcus. Perfect. The names I come up with always sound contrived. I finally found a name I like." He was so delighted he completely forgot about his friend's inconvenience. It's all well and good to be that extravagant, but as a cat living with an oyster-like master, I can't afford such whims. I'm happy just to have something to eat. So, my craving for ozoni wasn't a sign of extravagance. It was simply that I could eat it if I wanted to, and I wondered if there might be some leftover ozoni in the kitchen. I went to the kitchen to check. There it was, the same mochi, the same color, stuck to the bottom of the bowl. I confess, I had never tasted mochi before. It looked both appetizing and slightly repulsive. I used my paw to push aside the greens floating on top. The surface of the mochi stuck to my claws, and it felt sticky. I sniffed it. It smelled like the bottom of the rice pot when the rice is transferred to the container. Should I eat it or not? I looked around. Luckily, or unluckily, no one was around. Osan was, as always, expressionless, playing battledore and shuttlecock. The children were singing Mr. Rabbit in the living room. Now was my chance. If I missed this opportunity, I'd have to wait another year to taste mochi. At that moment, even as a cat, I grasped a profound truth. A rare opportunity compels all creatures to attempt even what they dislike. To be honest, I wasn't that eager to eat the ozoni. In fact, the more I looked at it, the less appealing it seemed. If Osan had come into the kitchen, or if I had heard the children approaching, I would have abandoned the bowl without a second thought, and the ozoni would have been forgotten until next year. But no one came. No matter how long I hesitated, no one came. I felt as if I was being urged to eat it quickly. I stared into the bowl, wishing someone would come. Still no one. I had to eat the ozoni. With a sudden push, I plunged my face into the bowl and bit into the edge of the mochi. I had bitten down hard, so I should have been able to tear it off, but to my surprise, I couldn't. I tried to pull back, but my teeth were stuck. I tried to bite again, but my jaw was locked. Mochi is a monster, I thought, but it was too late. Like someone sinking deeper into a swamp with every struggle, the more I chewed, the more stuck my jaw became. My teeth wouldn't budge. Mighty, the aesthete, had once said that my master was a man who couldn't commit to anything. He was right. This mochi, like my master, refused to be broken. I chewed and chewed, but it felt like it would never end. In my frustration, I stumbled upon a second truth. All creatures instinctively foresee the suitability of things. I had now discovered two truths, but I wasn't feeling particularly enlightened with my jaw stuck to the mochi. My teeth ached as if they were being absorbed into its sticky mass. I had to get it off quickly and escape before Osan came. The children had stopped singing. They were probably heading for the kitchen. In my panic, I lashed my tail, but it didn't help. I twitched my ears, but that didn't work either. I realized my ears and tail had nothing to do with the mochi. It was all in vain. I finally figured out that I needed to use my paws to get rid of the mochi. I lifted my right paw and rubbed it around my mouth. That wasn't enough to dislodge it. Then, I stretched out my left paw and swiped it across my face. The spell didn't break. Patience is key, I thought, moving my paws alternately, but my teeth remained firmly embedded in the mochi. Giving up on subtlety, I used both paws at once. To my surprise, I was able to stand on my hind legs. I felt like I wasn't a cat anymore. Cat or not, I didn't care. I would keep going until I was free of the mochi monster. I frantically clawed at my face. The vigorous movement of my front paws made me lose my balance. I had to use my hind legs to regain it, so I hopped around the kitchen, surprised at my agility. A third truth dawned on me. In times of crisis, one can achieve what is normally impossible. This is called divine intervention. As I was battling the mochi monster, aided by divine intervention, I heard footsteps approaching from the inner part of the house. This was bad. I frantically dashed around the kitchen. The footsteps grew closer. Alas, divine intervention seemed to be waning. The children found me. Look. The cat is eating the ozoni and dancing, one of them shouted. Osan was the first to hear. She dropped her battledore and shuttlecock and rushed in from the back, exclaiming, "Oh my!" The mistress, dressed in her figured crepe kimono, declared, "That nasty cat." Even the master came out of his study and yelled, "You idiot." Only the children found it amusing, and they all started laughing. I was angry and uncomfortable, but I couldn't stop hopping around. I was in a terrible predicament. Just when the laughter subsided, the 5-year-old girl said, "Mama, the cat is really..." And another wave of laughter erupted. I had witnessed human heartlessness before, but I had never felt so resentful. Finally, divine intervention vanished completely. I collapsed on all fours, my eyes rolling back in my head. Even they seemed to feel a pang of pity. "Get the mochi off him," the master ordered Osan. Osan glanced at the mistress, as if asking if she wanted to see me dance some more. The mistress wanted to be entertained, but not at the cost of my life, so she remained silent. "He'll die if you don't. Hurry up and get it off," the master urged Osan again. Osan, looking as disgruntled as someone woken from a dream mid-meal, grabbed the mochi and yanked. I thought my teeth would come out, like Kangetsu's. It was excruciatingly painful as she mercilessly pulled at my teeth, which were embedded in the sticky mass. I experienced a fourth truth: all comfort must be preceded by hardship. When I finally came to my senses, the family had already returned to the living room. After such a humiliating experience, I felt awkward being inside, where Osan could see me. I decided to visit Mikako, the calico cat who belonged to the shamisen teacher on Shinmichi Street. Thought for a moment and then said very politely, "I'm terribly sorry, sir, but we don't have tochimenbo today. We do have menchikatsu, if you'd like." Sensei looked very disappointed and said, "That's a shame. We came all the way here for tochimenbo. Can't you make some for us?" and gave the waiter a 20-sen silver coin. He really wanted to eat tochimenbo, didn't he? The waiter said, "Well, I'll talk to the chef," and went to the back. "That's a lot of trouble for a dish," the master remarked. After a while, the waiter came back and said, "I'm very sorry, sir, but tochimenbo is very difficult to make. It takes a lot of time." Mighty, unfazed, said, "Well, we have plenty of time, it being New Year's. We'll wait," and took out a cigar and started puffing away. So, I took out my newspaper and started reading. The waiter went back to consult with the chef again. "It sounds like a complicated dish," the master said, as if reading a war dispatch. Then, the waiter came back and said apologetically, "The ingredients for tochimenbo are very hard to come by these days. We can't get them anywhere, not even in Yokohama. So, I'm afraid we can't make it for you today." Sensei sighed and said, "What a shame. We came all the way here for nothing." He kept repeating this, looking at me, so I had to say something. "Yes, it's a shame. A terrible shame," I agreed. "Quite right," the master concurred. I couldn't understand what was so right about it. Then, the waiter, taking pity on us, said, "If we can get the ingredients, we'll be happy to make it for you." Sensei asked, "What are the ingredients?" but the waiter just chuckled and didn't answer. "Are the ingredients Japanese haiku poets?" Sensei pressed. The waiter said, "Yes, something like that. That's why they're so hard to find these days, even in Yokohama." Ahahaha. So that was the punchline. That's funny. The master roared with laughter, his knees shaking so much I almost fell off. He continued laughing, oblivious to my precarious position. He seemed delighted to discover that he wasn't the only one who had fallen victim to Mighty's pranks. So, we left the restaurant. Outside, Mighty was ecstatic. "See, I told you it would be interesting. Using tochimenbo as a prank was brilliant," he said. "I'm truly impressed." We parted ways, but I was starving since lunch had been delayed. "That must have been inconvenient," the master said, finally expressing some sympathy. I agreed with him on that. There was a pause in the conversation, and the sound of my purring reached the two men. Tofuku finished his lukewarm tea and said, "Actually, I came here today with a favor to ask." "Oh, what can I do for you?" the master replied, putting on a serious face. "As you know, I'm fond of literature and art." "Excellent," the master interjected, encouraging him. "So, some like-minded friends and I have formed a reading club. We plan to meet once a month to study literature and art. We already had our first meeting at the end of last year." "What exactly do you do at a reading club? Do you recite poetry or something?" "We started with works by classical authors, but we plan to eventually include original works by our members. Like the Song of the Lute by Ju Yi?" No, like Spring Breeze on the Horse Embankment by Busan? No. So, what did you read? We read a love-suicide play by Chikamatsu. Chikamatsu? The playwright Chikamatsu? There was only one Chikamatsu. It was strange that the master needed clarification. He was oblivious, gently stroking my head. Considering there are people in this world who mistake glares for expressions of love, such a misunderstanding wasn't surprising. Yes, Tofuku replied, watching the master's reaction. So, you read it aloud by yourself, or did you assign roles? We assigned roles and performed it. The idea is to empathize with the characters and express their personalities, using gestures and movements. We try to portray the characters as they would have been in their time, whether they are young ladies or apprentices. So, it's like a play? Yes, except without costumes and sets. Do you think you can pull it off? Our first attempt was reasonably successful. So, this love-suicide play you performed, it was about a boatman taking a customer to the Yoshiwara Pleasure District. Quite a scene you chose, the master said, raising an eyebrow, being a teacher and all. The smoke from his cigarette curled past his ear and across his face. It wasn't that dramatic. There were only a few characters: the customer, the boatman, the courtesan, the maid, the procurer, and the inspector. The master grimaced at the mention of a courtesan, but he seemed unfamiliar with the terms maid, procurer, and inspector, so he asked, "Is the maid a servant in a brothel?" I haven't researched it thoroughly, but I think the maid works at a tea house, and the procurer is like an assistant in the women's quarters. Tofuku, who had just claimed to embody the characters, didn't seem to understand them very well. So, the maid works for the tea house, and the procurer works for the brothel. And is the inspector a person, or a place? If it's a person, is it a man or a woman? I believe the inspector is a man. What does he do? I haven't looked into that yet. I'll research it later. I imagined their performance would be quite farcical if they didn't understand the characters. I glanced at the master, but he was surprisingly serious. So, who else participated in this reading club besides you? Various people. The courtesan was played by Kei, a law scholar. It was a bit odd seeing him with a mustache, delivering a woman's lines in a sweet voice. And there's a scene where the courtesan throws a fit. Do you have to throw a fit even when you're just reading? The master asked with concern. Well, expressions are important, Tofuku replied, clinging to his artistic principles. Were they able to throw a convincing fit? The master quipped. The fit didn't quite work out in the first attempt, Tofuku quipped back. And what role did you play? The master asked. I was the boatman. You were the boatman? The master's tone suggested, if you can be a boatman, I can be an inspector. Was the boatman a difficult role? He added, without flattery. Tofuku, unfazed, replied calmly, unfortunately, the boatman brought the whole performance to a rather abrupt end. You see, there were a few schoolgirls lodging next door to the venue. Somehow, they found out about our reading club and were eavesdropping outside the window. I was just getting into character, using all sorts of gestures and vocal inflections, when, well, I guess I went a bit overboard. The girls burst out laughing, and I was so embarrassed and flustered that I couldn't continue. We had to end the meeting there. If this supposedly successful first attempt was such a disaster, I couldn't imagine what a failure would be like. I couldn't help but purr with amusement. The master stroked my head even more gently. It was nice to be appreciated for making people laugh, but it was also a bit unsettling. That's quite a story, the master said, sounding as if he were offering condolences. We plan to make the second meeting much grander, so I came here today to invite you to join our club and lend us your support, Tofuku said. I couldn't possibly throw a fit, the master said, declining the offer. Oh, you don't have to throw a fit. Here's a list of our supporting members. He carefully unfolded a small notebook from his purple furoshiki. We'd be honored if you would sign and seal it. He placed the open notebook in front of the master. It contained the names of prominent literary figures. I don't mind being a supporting member, but what are the obligations? The master asked cautiously. There are no particular obligations. Just your name and seal to show your support. Then I'll join, the master said, relieved that there were no responsibilities. He would sign anything as long as he wasn't held accountable. Besides, being included among such distinguished scholars was a great honor for the master, who had never experienced anything like this before. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, going into his study to get his seal. I plopped down on the tatami mat. Tofuku picked up a piece of castella cake from the sweets dish and popped it into his mouth. He chewed for a while, looking pained. I recalled my Ozoni incident that morning. When the master returned with his seal, Tofuku had finally swallowed the cake. The master didn't seem to notice that a piece of cake was missing. If he did, I'd be the prime suspect. After Tofuku left, the master went into his study and found a letter from Mighty. "Happy New Year." How unusual, the master thought. Mighty's letters were rarely serious. Once, he had written, "I have not yet fallen in love with any particular woman, nor have I received any love letters. I remain safe and sound, so please rest assured." Compared to that, this New Year's greeting was remarkably conventional. "I would love to visit you, but unlike your passivity, I have embraced a proactive approach to this unprecedented new year, so I'm extremely busy these days. I trust you understand." Of course, the master thought, Mighty must be busy carousing during the New Year's holidays. "Yesterday, I managed to find a moment to treat Tofuku to some tochamenbo, but unfortunately, the ingredients were unavailable, which was a great disappointment." Here we go again, the master thought, smiling to himself. "Tomorrow, I'm attending a card game at Baron So-and-so's. The day after tomorrow, it's the Aesthetic Society's New Year's banquet. The day after that, it's Professor Torib's welcome party. And then..." How tedious, the master thought, skipping ahead. "As you can see, I have a series of no chanting, haiku, tanka, and modern poetry gatherings, so I'll be constantly attending these events for the time being. I apologize for sending this postcard instead of a proper visit. I hope you'll forgive me. Don't bother coming at all," the master thought, writing a reply. "When you do visit, I would like to treat you to dinner. I don't have anything fancy in my kitchen, but I'll try to prepare some tochamenbo for you." He's still going on about tochamenbo. How rude, the master thought, slightly annoyed. However, as tochamenbo ingredients are scarce these days, I may not be able to get them in time. In that case, I might serve you peacock tongues. He's hedging his bets, the master thought, intrigued. As you know, the edible portion of a peacock's tongue is less than half a pinky finger, so to satisfy your hearty appetite. "Just make something up," the master muttered. "I would need to catch 20 or 30 peacocks. Peacocks can be found at the zoo and Asakasa Hanayashiki, but not at ordinary bird shops. I'm having a hard time finding them." "You're making a big fuss about nothing," the master thought, unmoved. Peacock tongues were a very popular dish during the Roman Empire, a symbol of extravagance and refinement. "I've always wanted to try them." If he has time to write a history of peacock cuisine, he's not that busy, the master grumbled. "Anyway, with all these feasts, even I might develop a weak stomach like yours soon." "Like mine? How rude." Historians say Romans feasted 2 or 3 times a day. Eating 2 or 3 meals a day, even the healthiest person would develop digestive problems, thus naturally becoming like you. "Like me, again? How insulting." But the Romans, being experts in combining extravagance and hygiene, developed a secret technique. "What's this?" The master suddenly became interested. After each feast, they would take a bath. Then, they would induce vomiting to cleanse their stomachs of everything they had consumed. After this purification, they would return to the table and indulge in delicacies again. Afterward, they would bathe again and vomit again. This way, they could enjoy their favorite foods without harming their internal organs. 2 birds with 1 stone, wouldn't you say? Indeed, 2 birds with 1 stone. The master looked envious. In the 20th century, with increased travel and social gatherings, not to mention the ongoing Russo-Japanese War, we, the people of a victorious nation, must study this Roman bathing and vomiting technique. Otherwise, we might all become stomach ailment sufferers like you. "Like me, again? This is getting irritating." Therefore, those of us familiar with Western customs should research ancient texts and rediscover this lost secret technique and apply it to modern Japanese society. This would prevent future problems and allow us to indulge in pleasures without consequence. What nonsense, the master thought, shaking his head. I've been studying the writings of Gibbon, Mommsen, Smith, and others, but I haven't found any clues yet, which is a shame. However, as you know, once I set my mind to something, I never give up until I succeed. I believe I'll rediscover this vomiting method soon. I'll let you know as soon as I do. As for the tochimenbo and peacock tongues, I'll treat you after I make my discovery. That would be convenient for me, of course, and also beneficial for you, considering your weak stomach. Sincerely. So, he was just messing with me again. The master laughed. Mighty is so idle he plays these pranks at the beginning of a new year. A few uneventful days passed. The white daffodils in the vase were starting to wilt, and the plum blossoms on the blue branches were gradually opening. Finding this rather dull, I went to visit Mikako a couple of times, but I couldn't find her. I thought she was out at first, but the second time I went, I learned she was sick in bed. I hid behind the aspidistra by the water basin and eavesdropped on a conversation between her mistress and the maid. "Is Mikako eating?" the mistress asked. "No, she hasn't eaten anything since this morning. I put her in the kotatsu to keep her warm." How unlike a cat. She was being treated like a human. I felt both envious and pleased that Mikako was receiving such special treatment. This is troubling. If she doesn't eat, she'll only get weaker. Indeed. Even we can't work properly if we skip a meal. The maid spoke as if Mikako were superior to her. Perhaps, in this household, the cat truly was more important. "Did you take her to the doctor?" "Yes, but that doctor is useless. When I took Mikako to the clinic, he asked if she had caught a cold and tried to take my pulse. No, I'm not the patient. It's her," I said. When I put Mikako on his lap, he just chuckled and said, "I don't know anything about cat illnesses. Just leave her alone, she'll get better eventually." How rude. I was so angry I said, "Well, if you're not going to examine her, we'll be going. This is a very important cat," and I left. Really? The maid's "really" was an expression I would never hear in my own household. It was an elegant expression, fit for someone associated with the shogun's household. "She seems to be whimpering. Yes, I think she has a cold and a sore throat. Everyone coughs when they have a cold." Being the maid of someone related to the shogun's household, she spoke with exaggerated politeness. And then there's that consumption going around these days, it's true. With all these new diseases like consumption and plague, you can't be too careful these days. They didn't have such things during the shogunate. Newfangled things are rarely good, so you should be careful too. "Is that so?" The maid sounded deeply impressed. "I wonder how she caught a cold. She hardly ever goes out. Well, you see, she's made a bad friend recently." The maid sounded as if she were divulging a state secret. "A bad friend?" "Yes, that scrawny tomcat that belongs to the teacher across the street." "The teacher who makes that awful noise every morning?" "Yes, the one who sounds like he's strangling a goose every time he washes his face." Strangling a goose was an apt description. My master had a habit of making strange gurgling noises every morning while gargling in the bathroom, poking his throat with a toothpick. He gargled more vigorously when he was in a bad mood, and even more enthusiastically when he was in a good mood. In other words, he gargled constantly. According to the mistress, he didn't have this habit before they moved here, but he started one day and hadn't stopped since. It was a rather disturbing habit, and I couldn't fathom why he persisted. Anyway, the maid continued, "I don't know what good that noise does. In the old days, even servants and sandal-bearers knew proper etiquette. No one in a respectable neighborhood would wash their face like that." Indeed. The maid's "indeed" was used indiscriminately. "That teacher's cat must be astray. Give him a good beating next time he comes around." "I will. I'm sure he's the reason Mikako is sick. I'll avenge her." What a false accusation. I hardly ever went near their house. I gave up on seeing Mikako and went home. When I returned, the master was in his study, deep in thought, writing something. I was tempted to tell him what I had overheard at the shamisen teacher's house, but I decided to let sleeping dogs lie. He was humming to himself, looking like a divinely inspired poet. Then, Mighty, who had claimed to be too busy to visit, suddenly appeared. "Are you writing another poem? Let me see when you're finished," he said. "No, I just came across an interesting passage, so I'm translating it," the master replied, feigning nonchalance. "A passage? Whose passage?" "I don't know. Anonymous. There are some good anonymous works. You can't dismiss them. Where did you find it?" "In the second reader," the master replied calmly. "The second reader? What about it?" "The masterpiece I'm translating is in the second reader." "You're joking, right? You're probably just trying to get back at me for the Tochimembo incident." "I'm not a storyteller like you," the master said, twisting his mustache, looking unperturbed. "There's a story about someone asking Seino if there were any good writings lately. Seino pointed to a debt collection letter written by a horsecart driver and said, 'This is the finest writing of late.' So, your aesthetic judgment might be sound. Read it to me. I'll critique it for you," Mighty said, as if he were the ultimate authority on aesthetics. The master began reading in a monotonous voice, like a Zen monk reciting a sutra. "Giant gravity. What's this giant gravity? That's the title. What a strange title. I don't get it. It's about a giant named Gravity. That's a bit of a stretch, but it's the title, so I'll let it slide. Go ahead and read the text. You have a good voice, so it should be interesting." "Don't interrupt," the master warned, and began reading again. Kate looks out the window. Children are playing ball. They throw the ball high into the air. The ball goes up, up, up. Then it comes down. They throw it high again. And again. Each time they throw it, it comes down. Why does it come down? Why doesn't it go up and stay up?" Kate asks. "Because a giant lives in the earth," her mother replies. "He is giant gravity. He is strong. He pulls everything to himself. He pulls houses to the earth. If he didn't, they would fly away. The children would fly away too. You have seen the leaves fall. Giant gravity calls them. You may drop your book. Giant gravity says, 'Come.' The ball goes up in the air. Giant gravity calls it. It comes down. Is that it? It's not bad, is it? It's surprisingly good. Perhaps this is payback for the Tochimembo incident." "It's not payback. I translated it because I thought it was interesting." "Don't you think so?" the master asked, peering at Mighty over his gold-rimmed glasses. "I'm impressed. I didn't know you had it in you." "I'm truly defeated," Mighty said, conceding defeat even though no one had challenged him. The master didn't seem to understand. "I wasn't trying to defeat you. I just translated it because I thought it was an interesting passage. It's truly interesting. It's so unexpected. It's brilliant. I'm in awe. There's no need for such awe. I just translated it because I thought it was interesting. I'm giving up on watercolor painting, so I thought I'd try my hand at writing," the master said, still misunderstanding. "It's far better than your indiscriminately black and white watercolors. I'm truly impressed. It's encouraging to hear you say that. It motivates me," the master said, still completely deluded. Just then, Kangetsu arrived, apologizing for being late. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just listening to a magnificent piece of writing and exorcising the ghost of Tochimembo," Mighty said cryptically. "Oh, is that so?" Kangetsu replied, equally cryptically. Only the master remained unfazed. "You introduced me to a man named Oki Tofuku the other day," the master said. "Ah, did he visit?" "Tofuku is a very honest man, but he's a bit eccentric. I was worried he might be a bother." "He wasn't a bother. Didn't he say something about his name?" "No, not that I recall. Wherever he goes, he explains his name to everyone he meets. It's a habit of his." "What does he say?" Mighty asked eagerly. "He insists that his name is Oki, not Oki Tofuku. He doesn't want people to read Tofuku as Tuhoku, far and near." "That's odd," Mighty said, drawing in a puff of smoke. "He's obsessed with literature. He says Kochi, here, rhymes with his name, Oki, and he gets upset if people read Tofuku as Tuhoku, as if they're ignoring his literary intentions." "That is rather peculiar," Mighty said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. He choked on the smoke as it swirled back into his throat. He coughed, clutching his pipe. He told me about his reading club the other day when I treated him to tochimenbo. He said they're planning a grand second meeting and want you to attend. He's doing another Chikamatsu play, and he's playing the role of Omiya. Tofuku as Omiya? That should be interesting. I'm planning to attend and cheer him on, Mighty said. It should be entertaining, shouldn't it? Kangetsu chuckled. He's such an earnest man. Not frivolous like you, Mighty, the master said, taking revenge for the Andrea del Sarto, peacock tongues, and tochimenbo incidents. Mighty seemed unfazed. I guess I'm just a chopping block in Gyotoku, he said with a smile. Pretty much, the master replied. He actually didn't understand the expression chopping block in Gyotoku, but having been a teacher for so long, he was adept at bluffing. What do you mean by chopping block in Gyotoku? Kangetsu asked innocently. The master looked at the floor. Those daffodils are lasting quite long, aren't they? I bought them when I was coming back from the bathhouse at the end of last year, he said, completely avoiding the question. Speaking of the end of last year, I had a rather strange experience, Mighty said, twirling his pipe between his fingertips like a baton. What kind of experience? The master asked, relieved that the topic had changed. Mighty began his story. I think it was December 27th, Tofuku had sent a note saying he wanted to discuss literature and asked me to stay in for the evening. I waited and waited, but he never showed up. After lunch, I was sitting by the stove, reading a humorous story by Barry Payne, when a letter arrived from my mother in Shizuoka. Being old-fashioned, she still treats me like a child. She wrote, "Don't go out at night during the cold weather, and cold baths are fine, but make sure the stove is on so you don't catch a cold," and all sorts of other advice. I was touched. It's nice to have a mother. No one else cares so much. It made me think I should be more productive. I should write a great book and make a name for myself. I wanted to make my mother proud while she was still alive. Then, she wrote, "You're so lucky. Young people are suffering in the war with Russia, but you're enjoying yourself as if it were New Year's." I wasn't just playing around, though, even if she thought so. She listed the names of my childhood friends who had died or been injured in the war. Reading their names made me feel melancholic. At the very end, she wrote, "I'm getting old, so this might be the last New Year's Ozoni I celebrate." It made me feel even more depressed. I wished Tofuku would hurry up and come, but he never did. Eventually, it was dinner time. I thought I should write a reply to my mother, so I wrote a few lines. Her letter was over 6 feet long, but I'm not a writer, so my replies are usually about 10 lines. Since I had been sitting around all day, my stomach felt uncomfortable. I decided to go for a walk and mail the letter on my way. For some reason, I didn't feel like going towards Fujimicho and ended up walking towards Dotonbantsucho. It was a cloudy night, and a cold wind was blowing from across the moat. A train whistled as it passed under the embankment. I felt incredibly lonely. Thoughts of death, old age, and the fleeting nature of life filled my head. I could understand why people hang themselves. I could almost feel the urge myself. I looked up at the embankment and realized I was standing under that pine tree. That pine tree? What do you mean? The master interrupted. The suicide pine, Mighty said, pulling up his collar. The suicide pine is at Konodai, Kangetsu corrected. The one at Konodai is the bell-hanging pine. The one at Dotonbantsucho is the suicide pine. It's called that because anyone who stands under it feels the urge to hang themselves. There are dozens of pine trees along the embankment, but all the suicides happen on that one. 2 or 3 times a year, for sure. People don't seem to feel suicidal under other pine trees. And there was a convenient branch stretching out towards the road. What a perfect branch, I thought. It would be a shame to waste it. I wish someone would come along so I could hang them. But unfortunately, no one came. I thought, should I hang myself? Then, I thought, no, that would be fatal. Too risky. I remembered reading that ancient Greeks used to perform mock hangings at banquets. One person would stand on a platform, put their head in the noose, and another person would kick the platform away. As the person fell, they'd loosen the noose and jump down. If that was really how it was done, There was nothing to be afraid of. I decided to try it. I reached for the branch. It was nicely flexible. Just the right amount. I imagined myself dangling from it, and it was oddly exhilarating. I was about to do it, but then I thought it would be rude to Tofuku if he came and I wasn't there. So, I decided to go back home, talk to him, and then come back to hang myself. And did you go back to the market? The master asked. Interesting story, Kangetsu said with a grin. I went back home, but Tofuku wasn't there. He had left a postcard saying he couldn't make it due to unforeseen circumstances and that he would see me another day. Relieved, I thought. Now I can finally hang myself without any worries. So, I put on my sandals and hurried back to the pine tree. He paused, looking at the master and Kangetsu. And what did you see? The master asked impatiently. This is getting exciting, Kangetsu said, fiddling with his hari cord. When I got there, someone was already hanging from the branch. I had missed my chance by a hair's breadth. I was so disappointed. Looking back, I must have been possessed by the Grim Reaper. According to James, my subconscious, which exists in the underworld, must have somehow interacted with the real world where I exist, through some kind of causality. It's truly mysterious. Mighty looked smug. The master, realizing he had been tricked again, silently stuffed a piece of Kyuya mochi into his mouth, mumbling something unintelligible. Kangetsu carefully stirred the ashes in the brazier, looking down and grinning. Then, he spoke in a quiet voice. That's a very strange story. It's almost unbelievable, but I had a similar experience recently, so I don't doubt it at all. Ball. They throw the ball high into the air. That's the giant gravity story, Mighty said, recognizing the passage. Yes, you're right, the master replied, looking somewhat dejected. He seemed disappointed that Mighty had identified the source. Mighty, however, simply smiled and said, I like it. It's very interesting. Don't patronize me, the master said irritably. I'm not patronizing you. It's truly interesting. It's a great piece of writing. I'm impressed, Mighty insisted. What do women know, the master muttered. Nothing, of course. The mistress had gone back to the living room. You're still here, the master said to Mighty. You told me to wait, Mighty replied. I heard everything while you were out, the master said. Women talk too much. You should learn to be quiet, like this cat, he said, petting my head. You made the baby eat grated daikon, I hear. Yes, the master chuckled. Babies these days are clever, you know. Ever since then, whenever I ask him, where's the spicy thing, he sticks out his tongue. It's quite funny. It's cruel. You're treating him like a dog. Is Kangetsu coming? Kangetsu? Is he coming here? The master asked, surprised. Yes, he's coming. I sent him a postcard, telling him to come by 1 o'clock. He's giving a lecture at the Physics Society and wants me to listen to his rehearsal. I thought it would be a good opportunity for you to listen too, so I invited him here. You're free anyway. He doesn't mind. He's a good sport, Mighty said, making all the decisions himself. I don't understand physics lectures, the master protested, slightly annoyed by Mighty's presumptuousness. But this isn't some dry lecture on magnetized nozzles. It's on the mechanics of hanging. Quite an unconventional topic, wouldn't you say? You might be interested in hanging since you failed to hang yourself, but You're the one who gets chills just going to the kabukizi, eh? You should be interested in this, Mighty retorted. The mistress chuckled and returned to the next room. The master stroked my head silently. He was unusually gentle. About 7 minutes later, Kangetsu arrived as promised. Since he was giving a lecture that evening, he was dressed in his best frock coat and a freshly laundered collar, looking 20% more dignified than usual. I'm sorry I'm late, he said calmly. We've been waiting for you. Let's hear it, Mighty said, glancing at the master. The master grunted in assent. Kangetsu took his time. Could I have a glass of water, please, he asked. Are you going to do it properly? Next, you'll be asking for applause, Mighty quipped. Kangetsu pulled out his manuscript from his inner pocket and said, This is just a rehearsal, so please be frank with your criticism. He began his practice lecture. Hanging as a form of capital punishment is primarily practiced by Anglo-Saxon peoples. In ancient times, hanging was mainly a method of suicide. Among the Jews, the custom was to stone criminals to death. According to the Old Testament, the word hanging refers to the practice of leaving the body of a criminal hanging to be eaten by wild beasts or birds of prey. According to Herodotus, the Jews, even before leaving Egypt, abhorred the idea of their bodies being exposed at night. The Egyptians would behead criminals and leave their bodies crucified and exposed at night. The Persians, Kangetsu, we seem to be getting further and further away from hanging. Are you sure this is going somewhere? Mighty interrupted. I'm just getting to the main point. Please be patient. Now, as for the Persians, they also used crucifixion as a form of execution. However, it's unclear whether they crucified them alive or after they were dead. It doesn't matter, the master said, yawning. I have more to say on the matter, but I don't want to bore you. You mean, I'm afraid I might bore you, not I don't want to bore you, Mighty corrected him. Whatever, the master replied indifferently. If I don't want to bore you is vulgar, what should I say? Kangetsu asked, slightly irritated. I can't tell if Mighty is listening or just interrupting. Kangetsu, don't mind him. Just get on with it, the master said, wanting to get it over with. A willow, irritated, lectures on grammar, Mighty quipped. Kangetsu couldn't help but chuckle. If lecture is vulgar, what should I say? Just say whatever you want, the master said impatiently. Very well. Now, to the main point. I would like to discuss. The execution by hanging, from what I've researched, can be performed in two ways. First, as Telemachus, with the help of Eumaeus and Philoetius, tied one end of the rope to a pillar. Then, he made loops in the rope and put the heads of the 12 maidservants through the loops, one by one, and then pulled the other end of the rope, hoisting them up. Like shirts hanging on a clothesline at a Western laundry, Mighty interjected. Exactly. The second method is to tie one end of the rope to a pillar, as before, but the other end is tied to the ceiling. Then, several ropes are hung from the main rope, with loops at the ends. The maids' necks are placed in the loops, and then their support is pulled away. Like lanterns hanging from a rope curtain, Mighty added. I've never seen a lantern curtain, but I suppose it's something like that. Now, I'll demonstrate, using principles of mechanics, why the first method is impossible. This is interesting, Mighty said, and the master echoed, yes, interesting. Let's assume the women are hanging at equal intervals. Let's also assume that the rope connecting the necks of the two women closest to the ground is horizontal. Let alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 6 be the angles the rope makes with the horizontal, and T1, T2. T6 be the tension in each section of the rope. T7 equals X is the tension in the lowest part of the rope. W is, of course, the weight of each woman. Do you understand? Mighty and the master exchanged glances and said, more or less. However, their more or less was subjective and not necessarily applicable to others. Now, based on the polygon theory, we can derive 12 equations. T1 cosine alpha 1 equals T2 cosine alpha 2. 1. T2 cosine alpha 2 equals T3 cosine alpha 3. 2. That's enough equations, the master said impatiently. But these equations are the crux of my lecture. Kangetsu looked disappointed. We'll take your word for it, Mighty said, sensing the master's boredom. Very well, I'll skip the equations, then. That's probably for the best, Mighty said, clapping his hands. Moving on to England, the word gallows, or galga, appears in Beowulf, indicating that hanging was practiced in that era. According to Blackstone, if a condemned criminal doesn't die on the first attempt, they should be hanged again. However, Piers Plowman states that even the worst criminal shouldn't be hanged twice. It's unclear which is correct, but there are cases where the criminal doesn't die on the first attempt. In 1786, a notorious criminal named Fitzgerald was hanged. However, the rope broke on the first attempt. On the second attempt, the rope was too long, and his feet touched the ground. Finally, on the third attempt, the spectators helped him to his death. Good grief, Mighty exclaimed, always enlivened by tales of misfortune. What a way to go, the master said, amused. There's more. Apparently, when you hang someone, their spine stretches by about an inch. This was measured by a doctor, so it's accurate. That's a novel way to grow taller. Kusami should try it. He might finally reach average height, Mighty said to the master. The master, surprisingly serious, asked, "Can you really grow taller by being hanged, Kangetsu?" "No, it's not like that. The spine stretches because it's being pulled. It's not growing, it's breaking." "Then I'll pass," the master said. Kangetsu's lecture was much longer, covering the physiological effects of hanging, but Mighty kept interrupting with his strange comments, and the master kept yawning, so Kangetsu finally gave up and went home. I had no way of knowing how his actual lecture went that evening. A few days later, in the afternoon, Mighty showed up again, as usual, as free and easy as Guzen Doji, floating in on the breeze. "Have you heard about Oki Tofuku's Takanawa incident?" he asked, as if announcing a major news bulletin. "No, I haven't seen him lately," the master replied, as gloomy as ever. "I came here today to tell you about Tofuku's blunder. He went to Sengakuji Temple in Takanawa the other day. He should have known better than to go out in this cold weather. Visiting Sengakuji these days makes you look like a country bumpkin unfamiliar with Tokyo. It's his business. You have no right to tell him what to do." "True, I have no right. But still, there's an exhibition of the 47 Ronin's relics at the temple. Do you know about it?" "No, you don't. That's surprising. I thought you were defending him so vehemently because you knew about it. It's a shame for a Tokyoite not to know about Sengakuji." "I don't need to know about it to be a teacher," the master retorted, sounding more and more like Tennen Koji. "That's fine, but..." Tofuku was at the exhibition when a German couple came in. They asked him something in Japanese, but Tofuku, eager to practice his German, started speaking to them in German. And he did surprisingly well, which turned out to be the cause of his trouble. "What happened?" the master asked, finally taking the bait. The German man saw a lacquered inro, small container, with a design of Otaka Gengo and asked Tofuku if it was for sale. Tofuku's reply was quite amusing. He said, "Japanese people are all men of integrity, so it's not for sale." That was a good start, but then the German man, thinking he had found a competent interpreter, started asking him all sorts of questions. "What kind of questions?" "I have no idea." He spoke so quickly and incessantly that Tofuku couldn't understand him. Occasionally, he'd understand a word or two, like crowbar or mallet. He hadn't learned how to translate those words into German, so he was at a loss. "That's understandable," the master said sympathetically, putting himself in Tofuku's shoes. Then, other visitors started gathering around, curious about the commotion. They surrounded Tofuku and the German couple, staring at them. Tofuku's face turned red, and he started stammering. He had lost his initial confidence and was in a state of panic. What happened in the end? He finally couldn't take it anymore and said sayonara in Japanese and ran off. Sayonara is a bit strange, isn't it? I asked him later, "Don't you say sayonara in your country?" And he said, "Yes, but I said sayonara because he was a Westerner. I wanted to be accommodating." I was impressed that even in a moment of panic, he was still thinking about being accommodating. Sayonara is fine, but what about the German man? He was just standing there, dumbfounded. "Ha ha ha ha. Isn't that funny?" "I don't see what's so funny." "You're the funny one, coming all the way here to tell me this story," the master said, tapping the ashes from his cigarette into the brazier. Just then, the doorbell rang loudly, and a sharp female voice said, "Excuse me." The master and Mighty exchanged glances and fell silent. Female visitors were rare in the master's house. The owner of the sharp voice entered, her silk kimono rustling against the tatami mats. She looked to be in her early 40s. Her hairline had receded, and her bangs were piled high on her forehead, like a levee, adding at least half the length of her face to her height. Her narrow eyes slanted upwards at sharp angles, as if pulled taut by invisible strings. Her most prominent feature was her large nose, which looked as if it had been stolen from someone else and stuck onto the center of her face. It dominated her face like a giant stone lantern in a tiny garden. It was a hooked nose, starting with a proud upward curve but then drooping down towards her upper lip as if in a sudden attack of modesty. It was so prominent that when she spoke, it seemed as if her nose was doing the talking, not her mouth. I decided to call her Hanako, Nose Ko, in honor of her magnificent nose. After exchanging greetings, she said, "What a lovely home you have," looking around the room disdainfully. "Liar," the master muttered under his breath, puffing on his cigarette. Mighty, looking at the ceiling, said, "Is that a water stain, or the grain of the wood? It's a curious pattern." He was subtly prompting the master to be more hospitable. "It's a water stain, of course," the master replied. "How lovely," Mighty said dryly. Hanako thought to herself, "What rude people." There was an awkward silence. "I came here to ask you something," Hanako said, starting the conversation again. "Yes." The master replied curtly. Hanako tried again, adding a bit more charm to her voice. "I live nearby, in the corner house at the end of the alley, the large Western-style house with the warehouse." "I see the name Kaneda on the nameplate," the master said, finally acknowledging her address and name but showing no change in his attitude. "We're looking for a tenant. My husband is very busy with his business, so," she emphasized business and looked at the master expectantly. The master remained impassive. He was already annoyed by her overly familiar tone for a first-time visitor. "He has several businesses, actually. And he's a senior executive in all of them. You've probably heard of him." She looked at him as if expecting him to be awed. The master was easily impressed by titles like doctor or professor, but he had little respect for businessmen. He believed that even a middle school teacher was superior to a businessman. Even if he didn't believe that, he was too inflexible to curry favor with businessmen or the wealthy. He was indifferent to the affairs of those he deemed irrelevant to his own life, regardless of their power or wealth. He was utterly ignorant of the business world, unaware of who was who or what was going on. He also lacked any admiration for them. Hanako had no idea that such a peculiar person existed in this world. She had always been treated with respect, being the wife of Kaneda, and she expected the same treatment from everyone, even a shabby old teacher. She assumed that mentioning her address and name would be enough to impress him. "Do you know Kaneda?" the master asked Mighty casually. "Of course. He's a friend of my uncle's. He even attended the garden party the other day," Mighty replied seriously. Hanako turned to Mighty before the master could say anything else. Mighty was dressed in a simple Oshima Tsumuji kimono with a vintage Sarasa overgarment. "Oh, are you related to?" "I apologize. I didn't realize. I've heard so much about you from my husband. He's always indebted to your uncle." Her tone suddenly became polite, and she even bowed. "Oh, ha ha ha," Mighty chuckled. The master stared at them in bewilderment. "I believe your uncle was also kind enough to assist with my daughter's marriage prospects. Is that so?" This seemed a bit too abrupt even for Mighty. He sounded slightly taken aback. "We've received many proposals, but considering our social standing, we can't just accept any offer." "Quite right," Mighty said, relieved. "That's why I came here to ask you something," Hanako said, turning back to the master, her tone returning to its previous casualness. "A man named Mizushima Kangetsu visits you often, I hear. What kind of man is he? What do you want to know about Kangetsu?" the master asked, his tone laced with displeasure. "You want to know about his character, in connection with your daughter's marriage prospects, I presume," Mighty interjected. "Yes, that's exactly what I'd like to know." "Well, then, you must be considering him as a potential husband for your daughter." "Not exactly," Hanako said, suddenly becoming evasive. "We've had other proposals, so we're not obligated to accept his." "Then why ask about him?" the master said pointedly. "Well, you wouldn't be hiding anything from me, would you?" Hanako retorted, becoming slightly combative. Mighty sat between them, holding his silver pipe like a referee's fan, inwardly amused by the unfolding drama. "Did Kangetsu express any interest in your daughter?" the master asked, launching a direct attack. Not exactly, the master's attack had missed its mark. "But he must be flattered by the attention, wouldn't you say?" she said, regaining her composure. "Did Kangetsu write her a love letter or something?" Mighty asked, leaning forward with interest. It wasn't a love letter. It was something much more serious. You both know what I'm talking about, don't you? Hanako said triumphantly, holding up her hand adorned with a diamond ring. The master and Mighty were speechless, her words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The master, of course, and even the usually unflappable Mighty, were taken aback by this unexpected revelation. They sat there stunned, like patients recovering from a fever. Then, as the initial shock wore off, they burst out laughing. Hanako, feeling slightly slighted, glared at them. Is that your daughter? I see. That's quite something. Kusami, Kangetsu must be in love with her. There's no denying it. The master mumbled, still chuckling. You can't hide it from me. It's obvious, Hanako said smugly. Kangetsu told me everything about the incident on Azumabashi Bridge. I won't go into details, as it might be embarrassing for the people involved, but that's all the proof I need. What do you say to that? She folded her hands in her lap and straightened her posture, her imposing nose even more prominent. The master and Mighty were as good as invisible to her. The master, and even the usually unflappable Mighty, were stunned. They sat there speechless, like malaria patients after a bout of chills. As the shock wore off, however, a sense of amusement began to bubble up. They both burst into laughter. Hanako, feeling slighted, glared at them. Was that your daughter? I see. Kangetsu must be in love with her. There's no denying it. The master chuckled, still amused. You can't hide it from me. It's quite obvious, Hanako said smugly. Kangetsu told me everything. I won't go into details since it might embarrass the people involved, but that should be enough proof. Don't you think so? She straightened up, her diamond ring flashing on her finger. Her magnificent nose seemed even more imposing, rendering Mighty and the master speechless. The master, and even the unflappable Mighty, were taken aback. They sat there stunned for a moment, like patients after a fever has broken. Then, as the shock wore off, a sense of the comical took over. Both burst into laughter. Hanako glared at them. Is that your daughter? I see. Kangetsu must be in love with her. There's no point in denying it. The master mumbled, still amused. You can't fool me. It's quite obvious, Hanako insisted, regaining her composure. You've probably heard about what happened on Azumabashi Bridge at the end of last year. I won't go into details, as it might cause problems for the people involved, but that alone should be enough evidence, don't you think? She sat there smugly, her diamond ring glittering. Her imposing nose seemed to grow even larger, reducing Mighty and the master to insignificance. The master, and even Mighty, were momentarily speechless. They sat there stunned, like patients after a fever. Then, as their astonishment subsided, amusement took over. They both burst into laughter. Hanako, her expectations unmet, glared at them. What's so funny? It's quite rude of you to laugh. Is that your daughter? I see. Kangetsu must be in love with her. There's no point hiding it. It's not like that, Hanako retorted, her voice sharp. You surely can't deny it. We have proof. She regained her smugness. How did you find out about this secret? Mighty asked, intrigued. I have my ways, Hanako replied, looking pleased with herself. You seem to have too many ways. Who told you? The wife of the rickshaw man in the alley behind your house. The rickshaw man with the black cat? The master asked, his eyes wide. Yes. She's been very helpful. I asked her to keep an eye on Kangetsu and report back to me every time he visits you. That's outrageous. The master exclaimed. What does it matter what you do? I'm only concerned about Kangetsu. Kangetsu, or anyone else. That rickshaw man's wife is a nuisance. The master was getting angry. It's her prerogative to stand outside your fence, isn't it? If you don't want her to overhear, you should lower your voice, or move to a bigger house, Hanako said, unfazed. It's not just the rickshaw man's wife. I've also heard things from the shamisen teacher on Shinmichi. About Kangetsu? Not just Kangetsu, she said, implying something more sinister. The master was taken aback. That teacher acts so high and mighty, as if she's the only human being in the world. That idiot. Excuse me, she's a woman, not a he, Hanako corrected him, her language becoming increasingly vulgar. It seemed as if she had come to pick a fight. Mighty, however, remained amused by the exchange, observing them with the detached interest of a hermit watching a cockfight. Realizing he was no match for Hanako in a battle of insults, the master fell silent, but then he seemed to have an idea. You seem to think Kangetsu is the one who's smitten with your daughter, but I've heard a different story. Haven't we, Mighty? He said, looking to Mighty for support. Yes, I heard that your daughter was the one who fell ill and started saying his name in her delirium. That's not true. Hanako snapped, her voice as sharp as a knife. But Kangetsu said he heard it from Dr. So-and-so's wife. That's where you're wrong. I asked Dr. So-and-so's wife to feign illness and mention Kangetsu's name to see his reaction. Did she agree to that? Of course, not for free. I had to pull some strings and offer some incentives. So, you were determined to find out everything about Kangetsu, no matter what. Mighty's tone was slightly sharper now, perhaps annoyed by Hanako's manipulation. Well, it's not as if you'd be honest with me, she retorted. I would. Kusami and I would tell you anything about Kangetsu that we know. Why don't you ask us some questions, one by one? It would be more efficient. Hanako, finally appeased, started her interrogation. Her tone softened considerably when she addressed Mighty. I heard Kangetsu has a degree in science. What's his specialty? He studied geomagnetism in graduate school, the master replied. Hanako, not understanding what that meant, simply said, oh, her face betraying her confusion. Will that make him a doctor? Do you require him to be a doctor? The master asked, annoyed. Well, anyone can be a mere bachelor of science. There are plenty of them, Hanako replied nonchalantly. The master grimaced and looked at Mighty. We can't guarantee whether he'll become a doctor or not, so why don't you ask something else? Mighty said, also losing his patience. Is he still studying, whatever it is he studies? He recently gave a lecture at the Physics Society on the mechanics of hanging, the master replied, without thinking. Oh dear. Hanging. He sounds like a strange man. How can he become a doctor studying such things? It might be difficult if he were being hanged, but studying the mechanics of hanging isn't an impediment to becoming a doctor. Is that so? She looked at the master, trying to gauge his reaction. She didn't understand what mechanics meant but didn't want to appear ignorant, so she tried to read his expression. The master's face was unreadable. Is he studying anything else, something more understandable? He wrote a paper on the stability of acorns, which he also related to the movement of celestial bodies. Do they study acorns at universities? I wouldn't know. I'm not an expert. But if Kangetsu is studying them, they must be worth studying, Mighty said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Hanako, realizing she was out of her depth when it came to academic matters, changed the subject. This is a bit off topic, but I hear he broke 2 of his front teeth eating shiitake mushrooms during the New Year's holidays. Yes, and he has a piece of kuya mochi stuck in the gap, Mighty added, seizing the opportunity to tell another anecdote. How uncouth. Why didn't he use a toothpick? I'll remind him next time I see him, the master chuckled. Breaking your teeth on shiitake mushrooms suggests he has weak teeth. Don't you think so? I wouldn't say they're strong. Why doesn't he get them fixed? Is he too cheap, or does he like having broken teeth? I'm sure he'll get them fixed eventually. Don't worry, Mighty said dismissively. Hanako moved on to another question. Do you have any letters or anything written by him that I could see? I have plenty of postcards. Take a look. The master brought out 30 or 40 postcards from his study. I don't need to see that many. Just a few will do. Let me choose some interesting ones for you, Mighty offered, picking up a postcard. This one is quite amusing. He draws too. He's quite talented. Let me see. Hanako looked at the picture. Oh dear. It's a raccoon dog. Why would he draw a raccoon dog? She said, slightly impressed despite herself. Read what he wrote, the master said, chuckling. Hanako read aloud, on New Year's Eve, The raccoon dogs of the mountain hold a grand ball and dance merrily. They sing, "Come, come, New Year's Eve. Even the mountain beauties are welcome. Sepoko pono pon. He's making fun of me," Hanako said indignantly. "How about this celestial maiden?" Mighty presented another postcard. It showed a celestial maiden in flowing robes, playing the biwa. "Her nose is a bit too small, don't you think? That's a normal nose." "Read what he wrote," the master said. The message read, "Once upon a time, there was an astronomer. One night, as he was gazing at the stars from his high platform, a beautiful celestial maiden appeared in the sky and played the most exquisite music. The astronomer, captivated, forgot the cold and listened enraptured. In the morning, they found his frozen body covered in frost." "That's a true story," said the lying old man. "What nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Is he really a scientist? He should read some literary magazines," Hanako said, criticizing Kangetsu relentlessly. Mighty, amused, presented another postcard. This one was a printed picture of a sailboat. Below it, a short poem was scribbled. "The 16 young prostitutes, orphans of the sea, cried at the sound of the plovers on the desolate shore, the plovers that woke them from their sleep. Their fathers are sailors lost to the waves." That's quite good, isn't it? Quite moving. Do you think so? It could be set to shamisen music. If it can be set to shamisen music, it must be good. How about this one? Mighty offered another postcard. "No, thank you. I've seen enough." "I understand he's not completely uncultured," Hanako said, satisfied with her investigation. She stood up. "I apologize for the intrusion. Please don't tell Kangetsu about my visit," she said, making a rather self-serving request. She wanted to gather information about Kangetsu without him knowing about her inquiries. Mighty and the master replied with a non-committal "I'll thank you properly later," she said pointedly as she left. As soon as she was gone, Mighty turned to the master and said, "What was that about?" The master echoed, "What was that about?" "We heard the mistress giggling from the next room." Mighty called out, "I've just encountered a prime specimen of mediocrity. It's quite extraordinary. Please come and have a laugh." The master, looking disgruntled, said, "I don't like her face." "That nose is the centerpiece of her face," Mighty added. "And it's crooked. She's a bit hunchbacked." "A hunchbacked nose is a bit much. She has a face that could ruin a husband's life," the master said spitefully. "She's a leftover from the 19th century, put on display in the 20th, Mighty said. The mistress emerged from the next room and said, "Don't be so mean. The rickshaw man's wife will tell on you." "It will do her good to be told on," the master retorted. "It's vulgar to criticize someone's appearance. It's not as if she chose to have that nose. And she's a woman, you know." "It's cruel," the mistress said, defending Hanako's nose while also indirectly defending her own appearance. "Cruel? She's not a woman, she's a fool. Isn't that right, Mighty? She might be a fool, but she's quite formidable. She certainly got under your skin, didn't she? She has no respect for teachers. What does she think we are? She probably thinks we're like the rickshaw man in the alley. The only way to gain respect from people like that is to become a doctor. It's your fault for not becoming one. Don't you think so, Mighty said, turning to the mistress. "He'll never become a doctor," the master said, realizing even his wife had given up on him. "Don't underestimate me. You wouldn't know, but Isocrates wrote a great book at the age of 94. Sophocles produced a masterpiece when he was almost 100. Simonides wrote a brilliant poem at 80. I too, don't be ridiculous. You won't live that long with your weak stomach," the mistress said, putting a limit on his lifespan. "How rude. Ask Dr. Amaki. It's your fault I'm treated like this by that woman. You make me wear this wrinkled black cotton hari and these patched-up clothes. I'm going to start wearing clothes like Mighty's tomorrow. Get them ready for me. Get them ready? I don't have such fine clothes." Kaneda's wife became polite to Mighty only after she heard his uncle's name. "It wasn't about your clothes," the mistress said, cleverly deflecting the blame. The master, reminded of something, said to Mighty, "This is the first time I've heard you mention an uncle. You've never talked about him before. Do you really have an uncle? Mighty, as if waiting for this question, replied, yes, I have an uncle. He's a stubborn old man, a relic from the 19th century. He looked at the master and mistress. He's quite amusing, he continued. Where does he live? He lives in Shizuoka. But he's not just living, he's living with a topknot. He refuses to wear a hat, saying he's never felt cold enough to need one in his 6 to 7 years. He gets up before dawn, saying humans only need 4 hours of sleep and anything more is extravagant. He boasts that he trained himself to sleep only 4 hours a day, saying it was difficult when he was younger, but has finally achieved this state of self-mastery. He always carries an iron fan when he goes out. What for? The master asked. I have no idea. He just carries it. Maybe as a substitute for a cane. But something strange happened recently. He turned to the mistress. Oh, she said, not particularly interested. This spring, he suddenly sent me a letter, demanding a top hat and a frock coat. I was surprised, so I wrote back, asking why he needed them. He replied that he wanted to wear them himself. He said there was a victory celebration in Shizuoka on the 23rd and he needed them by then. He instructed me to order them from Demaru, specifying that the hat should be a reasonable size and the coat should be made to measure. Does Demaru tailor clothes? He probably mistook it for Shirokiya. How could you make them to measure without his measurements? That's my uncle for you. I had no choice, so I ordered them and sent them to him. That's reckless of you. Were they ready in time? Somehow. I saw a report in the local newspaper that Mr. Mikaya wore a frock coat and carried his iron fan to the celebration. He didn't give up his iron fan, I see. I'm planning to put it in his coffin when he dies. It's good that the hat and coat fit him. They didn't. I thought everything had gone well, when a package arrived from Shizuoka. I thought it was a thank you gift, but it was the top hat. There was a note that said, thank you for the hat, but it's a bit too big. Please have a hatter adjust it. I'll send you the money for the alteration. How careless, the master said, amused to find someone even more oblivious than himself. So, what did you do? He asked. What could I do? I kept the hat and wear it myself. That hat. The master chuckled. Is he a baron? The mistress asked, puzzled. Who? The uncle with the iron fan. No, he's a Confucian scholar. He studied Confucianism or something at Shoheiko in his youth, so he sits under an electric lamp, solemnly adjusting his topknot. It can't be helped. Mighty stroked his chin. But you told that woman he was Baron Mikaya. Yes, I heard it too from the living room, the mistress said, siding with the master for once. Did I? Ha 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 ha. Mighty laughed. That was a lie, of course. If I had an uncle who was a baron, I'd be a bureau chief by now. I thought it was strange, the master said, looking both pleased and worried. It's impressive how you can tell such lies with a straight face. You're a good storyteller, the mistress said admiringly. That woman is even better. I'm not trying to compete with her. But my lies are just harmless fun. That woman's lies are malicious and calculated. It's a different kind of lie. Confusing cunning with a natural sense of humor is an insult to the god of comedy. Don't you think so, Kushami? They're both lies, the master mumbled, looking down. They're the same thing, the mistress said, laughing. I had been listening quietly to their conversation, but I didn't find it amusing or sad. Humans seemed to be creatures who wasted their time by moving their mouths, laughing at things that weren't funny, and rejoicing over things that weren't interesting. I already knew my master was selfish and narrow-minded, but since he was usually a man of few words, I had always sensed a certain inscrutability about him. This had also been somewhat intimidating. But after hearing his story, I felt a sudden surge of contempt. Why couldn't he simply listen to the other two without feeling the need to compete? What did he gain from telling such pointless anecdotes? Was that what Epictetus taught him? The master, Kangetsu, and Mighty were all idle men, pretending to be detached and aloof, like gourds swaying in the wind. But they were still worldly creatures with desires. Their competitiveness and desire to one-up each other were apparent even in their casual banter. It was pathetic to see them behaving like the vulgar commoners they ridiculed, just a step away from being the same kind of creatures. Their only redeeming quality was that their language and behavior weren't as obnoxious and pretentious as that of the pseudo-intellectuals. Feeling bored with their conversation, I decided to check on Mikako and headed towards the shamisen teacher's house. The New Year's decorations were gone. It was already the 10th of January. The warm spring sun shone brightly from a cloudless sky, illuminating the small garden, which looked even more vibrant than it had on New Year's Day. There was a cushion on the veranda, but no one was in sight. The sliding doors were closed. Perhaps the mistress was at the public bath. I wasn't concerned about the mistress, I was worried about Mikako. The house was quiet and empty, so I boldly stepped onto the veranda, ignoring the muddy paws I was leaving on the polished wood, and settled down on the cushion. It was very comfortable. I was dozing off, forgetting all about Mikako, when I suddenly heard voices from inside. "Thank you for your trouble. Is it done?" The mistress must have been home after all. Yes. I went to the Buddhist sculptor, and it was just finished. Let me see. Oh, it's beautiful. This will put Mikako's spirit at ease. You're sure the gold leaf won't peel off? Yes, he assured me he used the finest quality. He said it would last even longer than a human's memorial tablet. He also said that the character Mayo, praise, in her posthumous Buddhist name would look better in cursive script, so he modified it slightly. Let's place it on the family altar and light some incense. Something felt wrong. I sat up on the cushion. I heard the mistress chanting, Namu Myosho Shinyo, in homage to the devout female Mikako, Namu Amida Butsu. You chant too, she said to the maid. I heard the maid chanting, Namu Myosho Shinyo, Namu Amida Butsu. My heart pounded in my chest. I froze on the cushion, rigid as a wooden cat statue. It's such a pity. It all started with a simple cold. If only Dr. Amaki had given her some medicine. That Amaki is useless. He treated Mikako like she was nothing. Well, it's no use speaking ill of the dead. It was her fate. So, Mikako had also been treated by Dr. Amaki. I blame that filthy tomcat from the teacher's house. He's the one who got her sick. Yes, he's Mikako's murderer. I wanted to protest this blatant injustice, but I swallowed my indignation. It's just not fair. A beautiful cat like Mikako dies young, while that ugly stray cat lives and causes mischief. Indeed. You won't find another cat as lovely as Mikako, no matter how hard you look. The maid said two instead of two cats, as if cats and humans belonged to the same species. Come to think of it, she did look rather cat-like. I wish that stray cat would die in her place. I decided I couldn't listen to any more of this. I slid off the cushion, jumped down from the veranda, and ran home, every hair on my body bristling with indignation. I never went near the shamisen teacher's house again. I imagine the mistress is now the one receiving a perfunctory memorial service. When I got home, the contrast between the elegant house I had just left and my own shabby dwelling was striking. It was like going from a sunny mountaintop into a dark cave. During my explorations, I had been too preoccupied with other matters to pay much attention to the decor, but now, back in my humble abode, I felt a pang of longing for the so-called mediocrity of Kaneda's house. Perhaps businessmen were superior to teachers. I felt a change in myself and consulted my tail. It swished in agreement. The master was lying on his stomach on the veranda, on a white blanket, basking in the warm spring sun. The sun, in its fairness, shone equally on our humble house with its weedy roof and on Kaneda's grand living room. The only thing out of place was the blanket. It had been white when it was new, sold as white, and bought as white some 12 or 13 years ago. But now, it was in a state of advanced discoloration, a mottled greyish-brown. It was doubtful whether it would survive long enough to reach a state of true darkness. It was already threadbare, the warp and weft clearly visible. Calling it a blanket was a misnomer. It was more of a rag. But the master seemed to believe that once an object had lasted for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, it should last forever. He was incredibly optimistic. He was lying on this ancient rag, his chin resting on his hands, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. That was all. Perhaps profound universal truths were swirling in his mind, but from my perspective, he looked like he was doing absolutely nothing. The burning end of the cigarette crept closer and closer to his fingertips, and a small cylinder of ash tumbled onto the blanket. The master remained oblivious, watching the smoke curl upwards in the breeze, forming intricate rings as it drifted towards the mistress's damp, freshly washed hair. Ah, I almost forgot about the mistress. She was sitting with her back to the master. How rude. Not at all. Rudeness, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. The master was calmly resting his cheek on her backside, and she was calmly presenting her backside to his face. There was no rudeness in this arrangement. They were a transcendental couple who had discarded the shackles of etiquette within a year of their marriage. The mistress, her back to the master, had washed her long, black hair and was now drying it in the sun, having spread a silk futon and her sewing box on the veranda. Or perhaps the master had simply positioned his face strategically near her backside. The smoke from his cigarette drifted through her thick, glossy hair, creating a shimmering haze, which the master observed with rapt attention. But smoke, by its nature, rises, so the master had to move his gaze upwards to follow its path through her hair. He started at her waist, then slowly moved his gaze up her back, past her shoulders and neck, and finally reached the top of her head. He gasped. In the center of his wife's head was a large, round bald spot, gleaming in the sunlight. The first thing that came to the master's mind was the brass oil lamp that hung in the family's Buddhist altar. His family was Buddhist, of the Jodo Shinshu sect, and it was customary to lavishly decorate the altar with gold. He remembered, from his childhood, a dimly lit altar in the family storehouse, with a heavy, gilded cabinet containing a brass lamp that was always lit, even during the day. The lamp had shone brightly in the darkness, and the memory of that light was somehow triggered by his wife's bald spot. The image of the lamp quickly faded, replaced by the memory of the doves at the Kannon temple. There was no logical connection between the doves and his wife's bald spot, but in the master's mind, they were somehow linked. As a child, he had always bought beans for the doves at the temple. The beans were sold in small, red earthenware dishes, and those dishes resembled his wife's bald spot in both color and size. His eyes and chin to stop talking about her. The master didn't understand. He had been feeling sorry for Kangetsu after hearing Suzuki's story, but now that Mighty had brought up Nosy, he was reminded of their argument. He felt both amused and annoyed. But the news about Kangetsu's dissertation was a welcome distraction, indeed a rare tidbit, as Mighty had put it. It wasn't just news, it was good news. He didn't care whether Kangetsu married Kaneda's daughter or not. He was simply happy for his student's success. He himself might be a flawed piece of wood, destined to rot in a corner of a sculptor's workshop, but he wanted to see the promising sculptures gilded and displayed. Has he really started writing his dissertation? He asked eagerly, ignoring Suzuki's signals. You always doubt everything. Well, I'm not sure if it's about acorns or the mechanics of hanging, but knowing Kangetsu, it must be something impressive enough to impress even Nosy. Suzuki looked increasingly uncomfortable as Mighty continued to talk about Nosy. Mighty, oblivious, continued his monologue. I've been doing more research on noses, and I recently discovered a discussion of noses in Tristram Shandy. Kaneda's nose would have been great material for Sterne. It's a shame such a magnificent nose will wither away without being immortalized in literature. I should sketch it next time I visit, for aesthetic research purposes. But her daughter is the one who's interested in Kangetsu, the master said, repeating what Suzuki had told him. Suzuki looked alarmed and desperately tried to signal to the master to be quiet, but the master was as unresponsive as a non-conductor. That's rather bold of her, considering who her mother is. But I doubt it's true love. Probably just infatuation. If it's infatuation, he should just marry her. Marry her? You were vehemently against it just now. You've softened considerably. I haven't softened. I'm just. Just what? You don't understand. With her family's wealth and her beauty, she could marry anyone. Kangetsu might be a bright young man, but they're not a match. The fact that her parents are so concerned and asked me to talk to you shows how much she cares for him, Suzuki said, explaining Kaneda's perspective. That might be true, Mighty said, always ready to argue. But you're overlooking an important point. If Kaneda's daughter marries Mizushima, she'll become the esteemed wife of a brilliant scholar. It's an honor, not a mismatch. We, as their friends, shouldn't stand in their way. Don't you agree, Suzuki? You're as energetic as ever. It's good to see you haven't changed in 10 years, Suzuki said, trying to deflect Mighty's argument with flattery. If you think I'm so admirable, I'll show you something even more impressive. The ancient Greeks valued physical prowess and offered lavish prizes to encourage athletic competition. But strangely enough, there's no record of them rewarding intellectual achievements. I've always found that puzzling. That is rather odd, Suzuki agreed, playing along. I recently discovered the reason while doing some research on aesthetics. It solved a mystery that had puzzled me for years. It was a eureka moment. Even the smooth-talking Suzuki was starting to feel overwhelmed by Mighty's verbosity. The master, sighing inwardly, started tapping the edge of the sweets dish with his ivory chopsticks, his head down. Mighty, however, was in his element. Who do you think solved this mystery and rescued us from the depths of ignorance? Aristotle himself, the great Greek philosopher, the founder of the peripatetic school. He said, "Hey, stop tapping that dish and listen." He said that the prizes awarded in athletic competitions were more valuable than the skills themselves. That's why they were considered rewards and incentives. But what about knowledge itself? If you want to reward knowledge, you have to offer something even more valuable than knowledge. But is there anything more valuable than knowledge? Of course not. Offering something inferior would diminish the value of knowledge. They considered offering mountains of gold and all the riches of Croesus, but they realized it wasn't enough. So, they decided not to offer anything at all. This explains why money can't buy knowledge. Now, let's apply this principle to the current situation. Kaneda is nothing more than a walking, talking banknote. He's a living, breathing currency. His daughter is like a postage stamp. And what about Kangetsu? He graduated at the top of his class from a prestigious university, tirelessly studies the stability of acorns while wearing a Hari cord from the Choshu Rebellion era, and is about to publish a groundbreaking dissertation that will rival the work of Lord Kelvin. He might have had a momentary lapse of judgment on Azumabashi Bridge, but that was just a youthful indiscretion, not a reflection of his intellectual capabilities. To put it in my own terms, Kangetsu is a walking library, a 28-centimeter bullet of knowledge. When this bullet explodes in the academic world, and it will explode, a postage stamp, no matter how many there are, will be reduced to dust. Therefore, Kangetsu shouldn't marry such an unsuitable woman. I forbid it. It's like marrying a wise elephant to a greedy pig. Don't you agree, Kusami? The master, without a word, resumed tapping the sweets dish. Suzuki, looking deflated, said weakly, "It's not quite like that." He knew that saying anything that might provoke the master would be unwise. He decided to appease Mighty and extricate himself from this situation as gracefully as possible. Suzuki was a pragmatist. He avoided unnecessary confrontations. He believed that the goal of life was not to argue but to achieve. If he could accomplish his goals without struggle, worry, or conflict, he would have achieved a state of earthly bliss. He had achieved success through this philosophy of blissful detachment, acquired a gold pocket watch, been entrusted with this delicate mission by the Kanedas, and successfully persuaded Kusami. He was on the verge of completing his mission when Mighty, a man unbound by social conventions and seemingly governed by a different set of psychological principles, had barged in and disrupted his carefully constructed plan. The philosophy of blissful detachment had been invented by the gentlemen of the Meiji era, practiced by Suzuki Tajuro, and was now the source of his frustration. You might say it's not quite like that, pretending to be detached and refined, but after witnessing that nosy woman's behavior the other day, even you, a staunch supporter of businessmen, would be appalled. Didn't she give you a hard time, Kusami? But apparently, I have a better reputation than you do, the master said smugly. Ahahaha. You're quite confident. You have to be able to show your face at school after being mocked by students and teachers for saying savage tea. I don't care what students or teachers say. The great Saint Beuve, the foremost critic of his time, was so unpopular when he lectured at the University of Paris that he carried a dagger for self-defense. When Brunetier criticized Zola's novels at the same university. You're not a university professor. You're just a riddle teacher. Comparing yourself to such luminaries is like a minnow comparing itself to a whale. You'll only be mocked even more. Be quiet. I'm as much a scholar as Saint Beuve. What arrogance. But carrying a dagger is dangerous, so don't try it. If university professors carry daggers, riddle teachers should probably carry pocket knives. But even a pocket knife is dangerous, so why don't you just buy a toy airgun from Nakamai's and carry that around? It would be amusing. Don't you think so, Suzuki? Suzuki, relieved that the conversation had shifted away from the Kaneda affair, said, "You're as playful as ever. It's good to see you. I feel like I've escaped from a stuffy room into a wide-open field. It's so tiring to socialize with people you have to be careful with. It's good to be able to speak freely without worrying about what you say. And it's even better to talk to old friends from our student days. It's so relaxing. I have to go now. It was good to see you again, Mighty." As Suzuki stood up to leave, Mighty said, "I'll come with you. I have to go to the Moral Reform Society meeting in Nihonbashi. Let's walk together. It's been a while." "Let's take a stroll," Suzuki said, and the two men left together.